So again, welcome po to all participants. I am Michiko Buot of the Forestry Development Center, your host for today. We are currently 262 participants here joining in the Zoom space, while there are some participating as well via Facebook live stream. Thank you all for your continued interest and support in the forest policy ETalks. Now that we are reminded of our house rules just earlier, let us proceed to the program rundown. Let us proceed to the program rundown. As you can see on the screen, we will be starting with the overview of the program or webinar to be discussed by Dr. Codilan, and then the opening remarks will be delivered then by Dean Mendoza. Dr. Calderon will then present their paper on The Price is Not Right, the case of Almaciga Resin in the Philippines, while Forester Valente-Peña will react or discuss, providing us the policy implications of the presentation. This will then be followed by an open forum moderated by Dr. Codilan. Finally, the closing remarks will be delivered by Dr. Bugayong. Now, to further give context on how the partnership of FDC and IRNR through this ETalks came to be, here is Dr. Analyn Codilan, the Associate Dean of CFNR, as well as one of the project staff of the Almaciga Resin study. Ma'am Ana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michiko. First, good morning and welcome to our 276 and more participants in Zoom and in FB Live coming from all over the Philippines. Good morning, everyone. So as related by our MC today, so today's policy forum is co-organized by the Forestry Development Center, the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, and the College of Forestry and Natural Resources. So we thank FDC for having this partnership with us. Today's presentation is actually part of the results of the project entitled Market Assessment and Financial Feasibility of the Production of Chemical Non-Timber Forest Products, which is one of the 4 projects under the program Sustainable Development and Utilization of Renewable Chemical Non-Timber Forest Products, or NTFPs. This is funded by the OSTP CARD. This specific project is led by faculty members from IRNR, led by Dr. Marge Calderon, our speaker for today. And she is joined in this webinar by other team members, namely Dr. Canesio Predo, Dr. Rogelio Andrade II, Assistant Professor Vanessa Palma Torres, Assistant Professor Carmina Paula Evangelista, Forester Lawrence Adolf Amada, and yours truly. The Almaciga resin industry, or Manila copal as it is more popularly known in the international trade market, has been up and running for over a century now. But the question remains why the industry has not fully taken off as an industry and why the local tappers involved in Almaciga resin tapping remain poor. Today's webinar topic will help us answer these questions and will let us speak into the current market situation of Almaciga resin in the country. And finally, will provide the answer if the price is really right for the Almaciga resin in the Philippines. The paper aims to ventilate the challenges faced by the Almaciga resin industry and how the resin industry can become competitive through appropriate policy interventions and ultimately improve the socio-economic conditions of the Almaciga resin tappers. So for our participants, after the presentation of Doc Marge, you may raise your questions after that. You may type your questions in our Q&A box or in the chat box, post them in the FB Live, or press the raise hand button if you opt for a live question. So yes, I guess moving on to the other parts of our program, we will be having the opening remarks but by our beloved Dean from the CFNR, Dr. Marlo D. Mendoza. Dean?
Hello. Allow me first to say my greetings to our resource speaker, Dr. Margaret M. Calderon, UP Scientist 1 and full professor from the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, CFNR. To the other members of our research team and our associate dean, no, has already mentioned them. To the hardworking FDC team headed by OIC Director Dr. Len Bugayong. And I was looking at the chat box. No? We have a couple of participants, no? Joining us from the DNR field offices, SUCs, LGUs, some colleagues of ours here, students, guests, and ladies and gentlemen. So isang mapagpalang umaga po sa ating lahat. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. It is with much pleasure to welcome you to the Forest Policy ETalks FDC webinar series. And the FDC has been regularly organizing webinars to inform the public and, most importantly, policy decision makers about relevant policy issues and recommendations for policy reform concerning forestry, environment, and natural resources. And I have been looking at recent policies, no? Developed by the DNR, and some of them actually have already addressed, I think, some of the pressing issues, no, when it comes to utilization and permitting. And we thank the DNR for that. And the FDC has been working with the DNR for a long, long time already. Our webinar today is an initiative born out of the partnership between the FDC and the IRNR, both of the CFNR. With the topic, "The Price is Not Right, the Case of Almaciga Resin in the Philippines." And Dr. Codilan has already highlighted the importance of Almaciga, and I won't go into that anymore. But I would just want to share, no, some of my interactions with the IPs of Palawan when I was still with the DNR, because I was as one of the officers of DNR, I was assigned to Palawan. And I've been interacting with some of the IP groups. And I've really observed that they're very dependent on NTFPs, non-timber forest products. Primarily, Almaciga Resin, honey, wild honey collection, and rattan gathering. And I've also seen how some of their practices are really unsustainable, and that's where we need to intervene. For instance, the mode of tapping of the Almaciga trees. Sometimes they cut too deeply, and this results to the compromising the health of the trees. And then for their honey collection, I've seen some of them using fire to drive the wild bees, and some of the beehives get burned, no, in the process. And also for the rattan gathering, I think there's also challenges when it comes to their gathering and storage method, no, where the rattan poles also get infected with fungi because of improper storage. So there's so much opportunity actually that we can share, no, to the IPs in there as they utilize the NTFPs. So hopefully this webinar will surface the challenges in the production, gathering production of Almaciga resin, particularly the constraining policies faced by the resin tappers, and recommend needed policy reforms and interventions to make the price of Almaciga resin more competitive and thereby help uplift the well-being of the Almaciga resin producers or tappers. And I think the FDC has already sponsored seminars in the past talking about or dealing with the other NTFPs. No? So before I end, I would like to acknowledge the speakers for the speaker, no? Dr. Calderon, for their work and efforts, and her team. And also I would like to recognize FDC and its director, Dr. Bugayong, for your efforts in creating this space and using this platform towards forestry development and essentially influencing important policy decisions. Finally, to our participants, I would like to express my appreciation for your continued support to such important initiatives. I encourage everyone, not only to absorb the lessons, but actively participate and share, and later on be able to apply whatever we've learned from this webinar. Hopefully, we can inspire a productive discussion that will create opportunities for research, collaboration, policy interventions for the Almaciga Resin industry, wherein our natural resources can be utilized for the greater good, for the benefit of the resin tappers and local communities. So again, a pleasant morning to everyone.
Thank you so much, Dean Marlo, for that very warm opening remarks for today's policy forum. And thank you also for sharing experiences. I'm actually excited for the things that you have shared. And this is actually a good opening for our open forum later on. And I'm looking forward to the questions of our participants for today's webinar. Before we move on, I would also like to recognize the presence of Dr. Ramon A. Rizal, the head of the program that I mentioned earlier, Sustainable Development and Utilization of Renewable Chemical Non-Timber Forest Products, to which this project is part of. Good morning, Dr. Rizal. Okay. So now, let's move on to the webinar proper, but let me first introduce our speaker for this morning. Dr. Margaret M. Calderon, or Dr. March, finished her Bachelor of Science, Master of Science, and Doctor of Philosophy in Forestry from the University of the Philippines, Las Bañas. She is a professional forester, a professor of Forest Resources Management, and was appointed UP Scientist 1 under the University of the Philippines Scientific Productivity System from 2013 to 2015 and 2019 to 2021. She teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in forestry economics and forest resources management, and undertakes research in the fields of forestry economics, natural resource valuation and pricing, and payments for ecosystem services. Dr. Calderon has provided technical assistance to various agencies like the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, World Agroforestry Center, World Bank, Conservation International, Center for International Forestry Research, and the Society of Filipino Foresters Incorporated. She is also a member of the Asian Forest Cooperation Organization, or AFOCO, Project Appraisal Panel from 2018 to 2020, and a director of the Asia Pacific Network for Sustainable Forest Management and Rehabilitation, or APFNet, from March 20 to 2023. So everyone, let us have our speaker for this morning, Dr. Margaret M. Calderon. Dr. Marge, the screen is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Calderon, and I'm making this presentation on behalf of my co-authors, Carmina Evangelista, Canesio Predo, Rogelio Andrada II, Analyn Codilan, Vanessa Palma Torres, and Lawrence Amada. We are from the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, College of Forestry and Natural Resources of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Our presentation is entitled, "The Price is Not Right, the Case of Almaciga Resin in the Philippines." This paper is derived from our project entitled Market Assessment and Financial Feasibility of the Production of Chemical Non-Timber Forest Products, which was funded by the Department of Science and Technology through the Philippine Council for Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resources Research and Development. This is the outline of our presentation. We will have a brief introduction to put today's presentation in context. Then I'll briefly discuss the methodology we used, describe our study sites, and present the results of the macro environment and microenvironment analysis that we did. After this, we will talk about the resin quota, production, and prices of Almaciga resin in the study sites, and then proceed to our conclusions and recommendations. Almaciga, or Agathis philippinensis, is a tree species indigenous to the Philippines. It is regarded as a premium species because of its high-quality wood and the hard resin it produces. The cutting of Almaciga trees has been banned since 1987 with the issuance of DNR Administrative Order No. 74 to save the remaining Almaciga stands and safeguard the livelihood of Almaciga resin gatherers. The Almaciga tree produces a resin with the trade name Manila Copal, attributed to Manila being once the resin's most important port. Traditionally, Almaciga resin was used to start fires, light torches, an ingredient in making incense, for caulking boats, or as a fumigant against mosquitoes. It is also an important raw material for the manufacture of varnish, lacquer, road paint, linoleum, waterproofing, and pesticides. The trade in Almaciga resin began as early as the Spanish colonial period. We found trade records that date back to the turn of the 20th century or during the early years of the American occupation. Since the 1970s, the production and export of Almaciga resin was generally declining, and nowadays, most of the Almaciga resin produced is used locally. This presentation aims to assess the market situation for Almaciga resin in the Philippines and discuss approaches by which the challenges faced by resin tappers can be addressed. For our methodology, we assess the existing market situation for Almaciga resin at the macroenvironment and microenvironment levels. For the macroenvironment analysis, we undertook Diana, maybe we can have the presentation from another.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry for some technical problems. So if it's okay with the participants, we will be playing again the video. Okay. Let's have it again. Thank you.
Renz, walang sound.
Okay, so while waiting for our video to be played, again, good morning to our 339 participants here in Zoom. And I believe there's also more joining from our FB Live. Good morning. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Calderon, and I'm making this presentation on behalf of my co-authors, Carmina Evangelista, Canesio Predo, Rogelio Andrada II, Analyn Codilan, Vanessa Palma Torres, and Lawrence Amada. We are from the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, College of Forestry and Natural Resources of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Our presentation is entitled, "The Price is Not Right, the Case of Almaciga Resin in the Philippines." This paper is derived from our project entitled Market Assessment and Financial Feasibility of the Production of Chemical Non-Timber Forest Products, which was funded by the Department of Science and Technology through the Philippine Council for Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resources Research and Development. This is the outline of our presentation. We will have a brief introduction to put today's presentation in context. Then I'll briefly discuss the methodology we used, describe our study sites, and present the results of the macro environment and microenvironment analysis that we did. After this, we will talk about the resin quota, production, and prices of Almaciga resin in the study sites, and then proceed to our conclusions and recommendations. Almaciga, or Agathis philippinensis, is a tree species indigenous to the Philippines. It is regarded as a premium species because of its high-quality wood and the hard resin it produces. The cutting of Almaciga trees has been banned since 1987 with the issuance of DNR Administrative Order No. 74 to save the remaining Almaciga stands and safeguard the livelihood of Almaciga resin gatherers. The Almaciga tree produces a resin with the trade name Manila Copal, attributed to Manila being once the resin's most important port. Traditionally, Almaciga resin was used to start fires, light torches, an ingredient in making incense, for caulking boats, or as a fumigant against mosquitoes. It is also an important raw material for the manufacture of varnish, lacquer, road paint, linoleum, waterproofing, and pesticides. The trade in Almaciga resin began as early as the Spanish colonial period. We found trade records that date back to the turn of the 20th century or during the early years of the American occupation. Since the 1970s, the production and export of Almaciga resin was generally declining, and nowadays, most of the Almaciga resin produced is used locally. This presentation aims to assess the market situation for Almaciga resin in the Philippines and discuss approaches by which the challenges faced by resin tappers can be addressed. For our methodology, we assess the existing market situation for Almaciga resin at the macroenvironment and microenvironment levels. For the macroenvironment analysis, we undertook steeple analysis and we looked at the social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, and ethical aspects of the Almaciga resin industry in the country. For the microenvironment analysis, we did industry analysis, supply and demand assessment, and supply chain analysis. We also explored the potential for a value-adding activity to enhance the profitability of Almaciga resin tapping and its potential contribution to the local community. We'll focus on our findings for two sites, Brooks Point in Palawan and Governor Generoso in Davao Oriental. Brooks Point is a first-class coastal municipality in the southern part of the province of Palawan with a land area of 130,340 hectares. The municipality has territorial jurisdiction over some part of the Mount Mantalingahan protected landscape, which is found on the western part of the municipality. It has 18 barangays, of which Barangay Amas was the source of the respondents for this study. On the other hand, Governor Generoso is a second-class municipality and is one of the 10 municipalities of the province of Davao Oriental. The total area of the municipality is 36,575 hectares, some of which form part of the Mount Hamikitan Range Wildlife Sanctuary. Governor Generoso is composed of 20 barangays, of which 6 barangays are involved in Almaciga resin tapping: Oregon, Sergio Osmeña, Surop, Tandang Sora, Tiblawan, and Upper Tibanban. Let's now go to the results of the macroenvironment analysis. For the social aspect, we looked at the characteristics of the LGUs to which the study sites belong. As of 2020, the population of Brooks Point was 73,994 with a population density of 57 persons per square kilometer, while the population of Governor Generoso was 59,891 and a population density of 164 persons per square kilometer. The poverty incidence rates of Brooks Point and Governor Generoso of 31.96% and 34.42% respectively are higher than the national poverty incidence of 16.7% in 2018. As of 2018, the high provincial literacy rate of Palawan and Davao Oriental compared well with the national average of 98.3%, while their 2012 HDIs were both lower than the national HDI of 0.644. In terms of technology, there has been a shift from traditional tapping methods to the tapping methods recommended by the Forest Products Research and Development Institute, mainly because of the extension activities of FPRDI and the inclusion of the recommended methods in the resin tapping policy of the government. For the economic environment, we found that trade in Almaciga resin was documented as early as 1914. We actually found a 1920 book that extensively described the different NTFPs of the Philippines, including the utilization and trade that ensued during the American period of our history. We looked at almost 50 years of Almaciga Resin domestic production and found the domestic production to be fluctuating, and with it, the forest charges collected for every kilogram of resin harvested from natural forests. The previous sources of resin include regions 2, 3, 4A, 4B, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. By 2016, only 4B was reported to produce Almaciga resin. We note that resin production from Davao Oriental, which started in 2012, was never reported in the statistics. We also did not find records of the shipments from Palawan and Governor Generoso to Cebu from 2013 to 2019. Furthermore, we noticed that the 2017 and 2018 quantities recorded by the National Capital Region of shipments from Palawan exceeded the domestic production reported in the statistics. Lastly, the exports of Almaciga resin have dwindled over the years, overtaken in value by LME gum and Salago fiber. The figure here shows the domestic production and export of Almaciga resin in the Philippines from 1970 to 2020, except for the years when the export exceeded production, for example, 1971, 1973, 75 to 81, 83 to 87, 97 to 99, 2007, and 2017 to 2018, which may imply erroneous reporting of domestic production and/or export data. The difference between production and export represents domestic use or consumption, indicating that for most years, a higher proportion of the Almaciga resin produced was used by local industries. This is consistent with the findings of Rizal et al. That the volume of domestic consumption was about 80% of the total volume of Almaciga resin produced by the country. For the environmental aspect, Almaciga is a threatened species, and its cutting has been banned since 1987. The remaining Almaciga stands are situated in the higher elevation areas of mountains. Our study sites are in or near protected areas. A small part of Governor Generoso is within the Mount Hamiguitan Range Wildlife Sanctuary, while the Almaciga stands in Brooks Point are within the Mount Mantalingan Protected Landscape. The resin tappers are indigenous peoples who are allowed to harvest resin as provided in the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. The Almaciga resin production in Governor Generoso was named a biodiversity-friendly enterprise by the Biodiversity Management Bureau. For the legal aspect, the utilization of Almaciga resin is supported by various laws and other policy issuances such as PD 705, RA 8371 or IPRA, RA 7586 or NIPAS as amended by RA 11038 or eNIPAS, among others. Our key informant interviews revealed that the people's organizations involved in Almaciga resin tapping found the processing and approval of Ordinary Minor Forest Products License or OMPFL or its renewal to take a long time, which caused problems and expenses to the POs. At that time, the permit was to be renewed every year. In October 2021, DNR issued Administrative Order number 2021-33, which provided guidelines for the tapping, extraction, collection, and transport of gums, resins, oils, and exudates, or GROE, which also covers Almaciga resin. Among other things, this new DAO increased the duration of the permit from 1 year to 5 years. Our study also found that the basis of determining the annual allowable cut, or AAC, a term which is more applicable to timber, was not clear. The POs also articulated the difficulty in implementing the resource inventory requirement prior to the issuance of the permit. DAO 2021-33 no longer mentions the AAC, nor does it provide for a resin quota. The inventory requirement resulted in higher expenses borne by POs who often resorted to borrowing from financiers. For the ethical aspect, Almaciga stands are found mostly in ancestral domains or the lands of indigenous peoples. The IPs are generally poor and have limited access to financial, health, and educational institutions. They have little or no power to negotiate on the terms of resin sale, especially the price. We found that the difficult resin collection process and the value of time spent to travel and collect resin is not fully covered by prevailing prices. And as mentioned earlier, the tappers have little means of financing resin collection activities, making them dependent on borrowing. Our efforts to interview representatives of industry users of Almaciga Resin were not successful, which we found unfortunate because we so much wanted to ask them the following questions. Are you aware of the conditions of the tappers, whether indigenous peoples or tenured migrants, who supply your raw material? Do you know how difficult it is for them to collect the resin, and yet they get so little? Would you like your company to be known to have treated poor IPs and tenured upland migrants fairly and contributed to their upliftment from poverty? Or are you content with being indifferent to their plight? Actually, dealing with IPs and tenured upland migrants can be an advantage to industrial users who can highlight the natural resin component of their products. Manufacturers can label their products as containing natural additives instead of synthetic ones as a marketing strategy. Some of the industrial users are big corporations in the paint and varnish industry, and one buyer takes pride in having taken great strides in protecting the natural environment in the communities where we operate. The microenvironment analysis focused on assessing the industry situation of Almaciga Resin in the study sites. It looked into the supply-demand situation in Palawan and Governor Generoso. A supply chain analysis was done to assess the flow of resin from source to buyers, investigate market inefficiencies, and identify policy recommendations to improve the local industry of Almaciga Resin in the sites. Direct competition and substitutes are also discussed. Let's look at the industry situation in Governor Generoso. Davao was one of the sources of resin as early as the 1900s when it once supplied 50% of total resin exports. The trade in Almaciga Resin in Governor Generoso started in 2012 with a company in Cebu as its buyer. Earlier in 2007, another company contacted them asking if they could supply resin. However, this company did not buy the resin as the quality did not meet its standards. The quality of resin from Governor Generoso is different because it is only about 75% soluble compared to the 95% solubility of resin coming from Palawan. The Cebu buyer had to invest in a melting machine to be able to utilize the resin from Davao, which cost approximately 2 million pesos at that time. Since then, Governor Generoso has been selling only to this company, making it its exclusive buyer. The current supply from Governor Generoso was estimated by getting the average volume collected per month per tapper. Based on the survey, a tapper collects an average of 102 kilograms per month or about 149,000 kilograms per year for the 122 tapper members of the Governor Generoso People's Organization. If we look at the potential supply of resin from Davao based on the 2012 inventory that was conducted by DNR-BMB, a total of 71,338 tappable trees were recorded. Considering the average yield per tree per year of 3.1 kilograms, a total of 221,148 kilograms per year can be harvested and sold. Based on this, there is a great potential for Davao as a resin source, not to mention other inventoried sites in 2013 in Governor Generoso and nearby towns as mentioned by the LGU officer, such as New Bataan, Manay in Davao Oriental, Bansalan in Davao del Sur, and Davao City. They are exploring other sites where they can involve other communities in resin tapping. Even though Davao has not been recorded in the Philippine Forestry Statistics as a source of Almaciga resin based on available data, it can really be tapped as one of the stable sources of Almaciga resin, especially with the active involvement of the local government unit in Almaciga resin tapping. On the demand side, the Cebu company was buying 5,000 to 8,000 kilograms of resin per month or 60,000 to 96,000 kilograms from Governor Generoso at the time of the study. Looking at the potential demand and considering the company as its sole buyer, the key informant from Governor Generoso revealed that the companies still sourced resin from Indonesia and Palawan. This means that the company utilizes more resin than what Governor Generoso sells to it. The company's annual output value, based on its website, is 2.5 to 5 million US dollars, and aside from paints and varnishes, they also export Manila copal. In one of the replies of a certain company, which was not included in the supply chain we did for the study, it was mentioned that there is a high demand for Manila copal both in the domestic and the international markets. The only problem is the process of license renewal and permit application in the country, resulting in low supply of resin in the market, even though there is an abundant supply of resin in the forests. Based on the interview, the direct competitors of Governor Generoso are Indonesia and Palawan, which are the two other sources of resin of its buyer. According to the assembler, while the price of copal from Indonesia is lower, the quantity from the company's supplier is not enough. Meanwhile, resin from Palawan commands a higher price of about 35 pesos per kilogram, mainly because of the difference in resin quality. Similar to Davao, the Manila copal trade in Palawan has been recorded since the 1900s. And because it has been one of the major sources of income of the indigenous communities, our literature review revealed that overtapping of Almaciga trees in the province was reported, leading to a decline in the number of Almaciga natural stands in the 1980s. Over the years, Palawan has been included in the Philippine Forestry Statistics data of sources of Almaciga resin in the country. In most years reported in the statistics, Palawan was the only recorded source of resin from the Philippines. Several studies on Almaciga resin have been conducted in Palawan, studying different tapping practices among various IP groups and assessing the value chain of the resin. If you look at the current supply from Palawan as discussed in the macro environment analysis in the last 20 years from 2000 to 2019, the average annual production was about 347,000 kilograms, with the lowest recording of 50,545 kilograms in 2005 and the highest of about 740,000 kilograms in 2019. In terms of the volume of resin shipped out from Palawan, the team was able to access shipment data from NCR and Palawan. There was a total of 9 permittees from Palawan recorded from the period January to September 2019. The total volume shipped out was about 306,000 kilograms. The permittees are IP organizations that buy resin from resin tappers and transact with middlemen who ship the resin to the buyers. Each permittee is granted an annual allowable cut or AAC per year, determined based on the inventory conducted by DNR in the concession sites. To estimate the potential supply of resin from Palawan, the total AAC of the listed permittees was used. According to the records from Senro, Puerto Princesa City, a total of 1.32 million kilograms AAC was granted to the 9 permittees in 2019. This volume is just a percentage of the total potential volume of resin produced in Palawan, as there are more permittees listed but were not able to renew their licenses within the period of assessment. For instance, the PO in Brooks Point was not included in the list because its permit was not yet renewed at that time. The total volume shipped in 2019 of about 305,000 kilograms can be used as an indicator of the partial current demand for resin in Palawan. A total of 6 buyers were included in the list, 3 from Manila, 1 from Cebu, 1 from Bulacan, and 1 from Laguna. 2 of these buyers use resin for the manufacture of paint and varnish. The other two are exporters of refined resin. There was no information available about the other two buyers. The supply chain analysis for Palawan reveals that the supply chain is complex and involves many middlemen. While this is ideal for industries with diffused sellers, so many sellers in the chain results in an increase in price of the resin at the buyer level, with prices at the tappers level remaining low despite the difficulty in harvesting resin. Inconsistency in sorting or grading among middlemen was also observed, which also resulted in inconsistency in pricing among middlemen and placing the tappers at a disadvantage. We also noted that there was market information asymmetry. Market information asymmetry works to the advantage of the buyers since they can impose prices on the tappers who lack knowledge on the market value of the resin. Among these buyers, the paint and varnish company from Cebu was the largest buyer with 58% or about 177,000 kilograms of total volume shipped to the said company. Also, 8 out of 9 permittees supply resin to this company. According to a key informant from the PO, this company buys 60 tons per month from the Brooks Point PO. According to a city trader connected to the Cebu-based company, its volume requirement is 300,000 kilograms per year, which Palawan's current supply alone cannot fulfill. Looking at the Philippines' paint and coating industry, with Almaciga Resin being used as a raw ingredient in paints and varnish manufacturing, there is a high potential for demand for Almaciga Resin. According to coatingsworld.com, the industry has shown a steady growth of more than 6% per annum, with more than 24 paint and coating producers comprising the industry. Most of these companies are concentrated in Manila, while others are operating in Cebu and other parts of Luzon. While there is a high potential supply of resin and high potential demand in the local and international markets, the problem with permit processing and license renewal limit the volume of resin traded. In terms of competition, Palawan's local competition is Samar because the company also buys resin from Samar. The city trader said that the resin from Samar is cheaper as it has a slightly poorer quality than Palawan resin in terms of purity. However, Samar resin was found to be more viscous than the Palawan resin when melted. Manila Copal also competes with substitutes such as Manila Elemi, West African Copal, Kauri Copal, Damars, and synthetic resin such as polyurethane. All these resins can be used as ingredients in paints and varnish. However, among these substitutes, only Damar and synthetic resin come close as the others are too expensive to be used for the same purpose. A kilo of Damar and a kilo of polyurethane are both priced at about 66 pesos per kilogram. Prices vary depending on the seller. The others sell at 200 to 600 pesos per kilogram. Now let's go to the supply chain analysis done for both sites. Shown in the slide is the geographic flow of Almaciga Resin from Governor Generoso. There are only 4 actors in the supply chain. Resins originate from the forests of Mount Hamigitan, where tappers harvest them and sell the resins either to a local buyer or directly to the sole assembler in the area. The assembler then coordinates with the buyer in Cebu. The supply chain of Governor Generoso is simple and organized as the industrial buyer transacts only with one assembler covering the entire area. Price is also fixed at 20 pesos per kilogram because of the short supply chain. The total annual cost per tapper is about 6,000 pesos per year or 4.93 pesos per kilogram. About 87% of the respondents sell directly to the assembler at 20 pesos per kilogram. Other respondents sell to local buyers in their areas. The buyer earns 2 pesos per kilogram because the tapper lowers his or her selling price to 18 pesos per kilogram so that in turn the buyer can sell the resin to the assembler at the fixed price of 20 pesos. In terms of profit margin, tappers get the highest profit margin of 75% when they sell directly to the assembler or 74% when they sell to a local buyer. The buyer earns a 10% profit margin, while the assembler has no profit in the transactions because the company pays for all the expenses incurred. Even though the profit margin of tappers appears to be high, they still remain poor because of the limited resin they can harvest per month, coupled with the buyer-dictated buying price. Also, the profit margin of the tappers does not cover their opportunity cost in harvesting resin. They spend a few days to a week in the forest during harvest period and forego other potential sources of income such as farming or being hired as a laborer. Among the market inefficiencies identified in Governor Generoso are the following. First is unfair pricing. While profit margin is high at the tappers level, the tappers remain poor because the costs included in the computation do not cover opportunity costs of tappers. The tappers travel an average of 3.15 hours by foot on steep and rugged terrain to get to the natural Almaciga stands. They stay there for several days to harvest resin, then go back to their houses with a 40 to 50 kilogram sack of resin on their backs. Second is the absence of sorting or grading. Prices of Almaciga resin are based on the grade or quality of the resin. The lack of sorting and grading limits the tappers to get better prices for better quality resin. For example, if the resin is cleaner or if the lumps of resin are bigger. Third is the asymmetry of market information. There is asymmetry of Almaciga resin market information with the resin tappers again in the losing end. They have little idea about the value of their resin beyond the price that they are paid by the loan buyer. The supply chain of Manila Copal in Palawan involves more actors compared to that of Governor Generoso. The resin goes through various middlemen they call kapatas, who then sell to concessionaires who are the license holders, who then sell to an industrial buyer or processor exporter. This has been the case in Palawan since the 1990s. The figure here shows the geographic flow of Almaciga resin from resin tappers to industrial buyers and processor exporters. As shown in the figure, there are 5 actors in the chain originating from southern Palawan and 4 actors in the chain originating from northern Palawan. The supply chain of Almaciga resin from southern Palawan originates from the resin tappers from Barangay Amas in Brooks Point, who sell their harvests to their people's organization, which then sells either to a city trader in Puerto Princesa or to one in Aborlan. The city trader in Puerto Princesa then sells to a processor exporter located in Malabon City in Manila, while the city trader from Aborlan sells to an industrial buyer in Cebu, a city trader in Puerto Princesa, and a processor exporter in Valenzuela City. We observed a significant difference between the AAC granted to the permittees in Palawan and the actual quantities of resin traded. The actual quantities of resin produced and shipped out based on the records of Senro Puerto Princesa of about 387,000 kilograms and 306,000 kilograms respectively were only about 23% of the total AAC of 1.322 million kilograms issued for Palawan. These values indicate that the resin tappers have not been able to exhaust their AACs, which may give the impression that there is a surplus of Almaciga resin from Palawan. However, the question remains, why have the permittees in Palawan, all IP organizations, been unable to maximize their AACs despite the high demand for the resin? Our findings offer at least 3 explanations. First, the remaining Almaciga stands are mostly located in inaccessible areas. Not only do the tappers have to travel far distances, but they also have to contend with steep and difficult terrain. The tappers walk many hours to get to the Almaciga stands and travel the same distance going back, but with heavy loads of resin on their backs. Even if the tappers involve other family members or hire labor and make use of rafts when navigable streams are present, the quantity of resin that could be transported for each trip is still limited. This implies that the AACs may have been set without regard for the economic radius of Almaciga resin collected, since some stands are simply too far and difficult to access to be considered as feasible sources of resin. The team was not able to find historical data about the location of Almaciga stands that were tapped in the early years, but it may be safe to assume that there were Almaciga stands in lower elevations and within shorter distances from local centers of commerce, which may have made the high AACs realistic. But over the years, the resin sources have been pushed back and up to the higher parts of the mountains. Second, some POs have been awarded high AACs on account of the big areas of their ancestral domains or CBFMA. For example, one CBFM PO has an area of 4,470 hectares and was granted an AAC of 120,000 kilograms per year. With 46 members, this means that each member can collect as much as 2,608 kilograms of resin per year. The PO in Brooks Point has an area of 1,700 hectares, an AAC of 30,000 kilograms per year, and 40 members. Consequently, each member can only collect about 750 kilograms of resin at most. This may explain why the first PO was not able to fully utilize its AAC, producing only 16,560 kilograms in 2019, or a utilization rate of only 13.8%. On the other hand, the Brooks Point resin tappers brought down more than 30,000 kilograms per year, but the PO could transport only 30,000 kilograms. The PO still paid for this, but could not transport it because the resin quota has already been reached. This made us think, how much resin can the Almaciga trees really produce? Are some of the resins being wasted because 1, they can be left in the tapping area because the quota has already been reached, assuming that the tappers monitor the weight of the resin that they bring down, or 2, the resin can deteriorate with prolonged storage in the PO's bodega. We can imagine that once a tree has been tapped, resin will ooze, and it cannot be turned off once the quota has been met. The team saw this as a potential area for investigation. Third, the difficulty of securing or renewing permits has resulted in Almaciga resin not being made available to the local market despite the high AAC. This was affirmed by one resin exporter who said that securing permits from the national government has always been a challenge. According to him, there were too many requirements and a redundancy of requirements from national and even local government offices. While our study revealed availability of resin on site, the key informant observed lack of supply of resin in the market, with global demand for Almaciga resin continuously increasing. Therefore, the total AAC of permittees in Palawan does not give an accurate picture of the Almaciga resin available to the market. While the total AAC ranged from 1.322 million kilograms in 2019 to 1.696 million kilograms in 2018, depending on the number of active permittees, in fact, only about 25% of the AAC was utilized and supplied to the market. While there is no data to show the actual resin requirement of the local paint and coating industry, several key informants revealed that the industrial buyers' agents were willing to buy more resin than what the POs could produce, looking for other sources in other provinces, and even augmenting the resin sourced locally with imported resins. Moreover, the market projection on the demand for natural resins shows an increasing trend as the wood coating industry and other different end-user industries expand. And so we say, the price is the problem. The price is too low to cover the costs of resin tappers, which has resulted in a low utilization rate of the AAC. What can be done then? There is a need to consider the opportunity cost of time, estimated to be about 24 pesos per kilogram of resin, in setting prices. However, we also know that it's not always efficient and effective to command prices. The price that will prevail will be the result of negotiation. We see the need to strengthen the organizational and financial capacity of POs engaged in Almaciga Resin tapping so that they can negotiate with buyers, explain how the prices they receive are not commensurate to the level of effort they exert. On the buyer's side, the manufacturers can label their products as containing natural additives instead of synthetic ones as a marketing strategy. Some of the industrial users are big corporations in the paint and varnish industry, and one buyer even takes pride in having taken great strides in protecting the natural environment in communities where they operate, so might as well walk the talk. But a market reality is that the Almaciga resin tappers are competing with suppliers of similar raw materials, whether natural or synthetic. Thus, our team also explored the possibility of the POs engaging in value-adding activities. We looked at the possibility of the resin tappers going beyond their current practice of cleaning and sorting the resin by processing the raw resin to increase its value and selling price. The Governor Generoso PO was especially interested in acquiring a melting machine to increase the value of its resin, which has lower solubility compared to Palawan. From 2001 to 2008, the Forest Products Research and Development Institute, or FPRDI, implemented a project that developed a pilot plant for refining Almaciga resin. The developed technology aimed at producing refined and clean grade A resin, presumably obtained by passing the resin in solution form through a series of cleaning and purifying equipment without leading to the alteration of the chemical properties of the resin. However, the pilot plant did not reach commercialization stage due to the lack of resin supply. Still, if the AAC issued to permittees or concessionaires can be optimized, we believe that there will be sufficient raw materials to feed the plant. The first cost-return analysis for the Governor Generoso PO was undertaken under 3 scenarios. Using the current resin production level at the current price of 20 pesos per kilogram, the fair price without processing of 32.45 pesos per kilogram, and the fair price with processing of 120 pesos per kilogram. The results show that at the current price of 20 pesos per kilogram, the tappers will incur losses amounting to 675,840 pesos per year because the price does not cover the full cost of producing resin of 27.04 pesos per kilogram. On the other hand, if the fair price without processing of 32.45 pesos will be used, the tappers will have a profit of about 519,000 pesos per year because the price is now higher than the cost of production. If the PO will venture into processing to produce refined resin, the 120 peso per kilogram price of refined resin will be more than enough to cover the higher cost of production of 44.10 pesos per kilogram and will increase the profit to about 978,000 pesos per year. As the processing will only use one machine, the profit with processing will even be higher if the volume in excess of the plant capacity of 80,400 kilograms will be sold as unprocessed resin. These results illustrate that producing refined resin will give the tappers the highest profit, but if this is not yet possible, at the very least, they should get the fair price of resin that cover the tappers' opportunity cost and a modest 20% markup. The study found that it was not feasible for the Brooks Point PO to engage in value-adding processing by acquiring a melting machine because of its low AAC of 30,000 kilograms at that time. Thus, the cost-return analysis was undertaken for resin tapping only. We note, however, that the AAC of this PO was recently increased to 120,000 kilograms per year. Furthermore, the resins produced by this PO are classified as TIPAC, the highest classification, Class A and Class B. The fair selling prices of TIPAC, Class A and Class B Almaciga resin were determined to be 46 pesos, 44 pesos, and 32 pesos per kilogram respectively. These are the prices that the resin tappers will receive and include the full opportunity cost, which is only partially covered under current prices, and the material cost and the 20% markup. The supply chain analysis computed the PO's average cost of 8 pesos per kilogram to cover the costs of sacks, forest charges, permit renewal, DNR inspection, TAMBI endorsement, mayor's permit, classifier, and cashier, and a markup of 12 pesos per kilogram for tipak and 9 pesos for Class A and Class B resin. These were added to the tapper's resin prices to arrive at the fair selling prices of about 67 pesos per kilogram for tipak, 61 pesos per kilogram for Class A, and 49 pesos per kilogram for Class B. These prices are higher than the current buying prices of the Cebu-based company of 51, 46, and 36 pesos per kilogram respectively, which may have been set without considering the costs incurred by resin tappers in collecting resin, especially their opportunity cost of time. I earlier mentioned DNR Administrative Order No. 2021-33, which provided guidelines for the tapping, extraction, collection, and transport of gums, resins, oils, and exudates, or GROE for short. Aside from enhancing the guidelines for GROE, DAO 2021-33 aims to uplift the socio-economic condition of upland communities, tenure migrants, indigenous cultural communities, owners of trees that produce GROE in private titled lands, and other stakeholders through their sustainable harvest, strengthening of the research and development programs on the propagation, plantation development, resin tapping, sorting and grading system, extraction of oils and exudates, allowable volume, processing and use of GROE, and streamlining the procedures for the utilization of GROE. The new DAO addresses one of the major problems of resin tappers in processing permits. Previously, the permit was only for 1 year, but now the GROE permit has a validity of 5 years, and this is really a big help to the POs. However, their difficulty regarding the conduct of inventory remains. The 100% tree inventory of tappable trees with DBH of at least 40 centimeters is not easy, not because of the number of candidate trees for tapping, but because of the location of the remaining Almaciga stands. As described earlier, accessing these stands is difficult and requires long travel time. In response to the problem that was articulated to us during the study, the team is currently undertaking a policy advocacy project also funded by DOST Picard. The policy analysis and advocacy project pushes for a science-based policy on the production of Almaciga resin by revisiting the basis for the resin quota setting and to provide scientific basis in terms, for example, of the age of trees or accessibility for a more rationalized setting of the AAC or the resin quota for Almaciga resin. This is the research and advocacy framework of the project we are currently undertaking. For the research component, we will review existing policies, explore more appropriate permitting policies, and seek to establish the basis of the Almaciga resin quota, all of which will inform the formulation of research and development directions. For the advocacy component, we will design an alternative policy and examine its benefits and costs, undertake consultation and validation meetings, and draft a policy document. Collectively, we hope to work towards promoting the welfare of resin tappers and the sustainable utilization of Almaciga resources. Based on our findings, we made the following conclusions. First, the remaining Almaciga stands that are now being tapped are in the higher elevation areas of mountains, and tappers must hike several hours to reach these areas. The distance and difficulty of access to the Almaciga stands that are currently being tapped have resulted in long travel time for resin tappers, but the opportunity cost of time is not considered in the low prices of resin that they receive. This contributes to the poverty of the resin tappers. There is an opportunity to increase the contribution of Almaciga resin production as a raw material source for local industries and for export If a serious inventory of Almaciga resources will be undertaken and the basis of determining the resin quota will be informed by science, particularly the growth and yield of Almaciga trees and their capacity to produce resin over time. The local government units are in a good position to help the people's organizations in negotiating for better terms in selling their Almaciga resin and extending financing for permit application and resin collection. The strong support by the LGU of Governor Generoso has placed the municipality on the Almaciga resin production map in less than 10 years since it began producing Almaciga resin. We also conclude that the POs are adversely affected by the delays in the processing or renewal and release of their ordinary minor forest products license, which in some cases took almost 2 years. These long delays make the POs even more susceptible to borrowing money from financiers because many of them depend on Almaciga resin collection for their livelihood. The market for Almaciga resin is monopsonistic in Governor Generoso with only one buyer and oligopsonistic in Palawan with a few buyers. As such, the prices of resin are heavily controlled by the buyers. The prevailing prices for the resin in Palawan and Governor Generoso are low and do not capture the time spent and the difficulty of collecting the Almaciga resin. There is asymmetry of Almaciga resin market information with the resin tappers in the losing end. They have little idea about the value of their products beyond the prices that they are paid. The POs may consider undertaking value-adding processing activities to increase the price of their resin. Finally, we note that the market for Almaciga resin is far from being competitive to the detriment of resin tappers who have not received the correct price for their resin all these years. On its own, the market cannot be expected to resolve these problems, thus warranting the intervention of government and other stakeholders in the Almaciga resin industry. Based on our findings, we offer the following recommendations. First, we see the need to strengthen the organizational and financial capacity of POs engaged in Almaciga resin tapping. We see the need to explore further possible ways to simplify the permitting process and reduce the cost and documentary requirements for permit application or renewal. We also see the need to develop a science-based, practical, and cost-effective forest inventory system for Almaciga resources that will minimize the cost of inventory currently borne by permit applicants, and to determine the resin quota, which, among others, should consider the growth and resin yield of Almaciga trees and sound resource inventory data. Properly setting the resin quota is critical in ensuring the sustainability of the Almaciga resource base and possibly increasing available Almaciga resin for domestic industrial users and the export market. And finally, we recommend the development of Almaciga plantations to augment the natural sources of Almaciga and improve the accessibility of Almaciga stands in the future. While we know that Almaciga is a slow-growing species, we believe that there is no better time to develop Almaciga plantations now because the best time was 50 or maybe 80 or maybe 100 years ago. We would like to thank the Department of Science and Technology, or DOST, and the Philippine Council for Agriculture, Aquatic, and Natural Resources Research and Development, or PICARD, for funding our project entitled Market Assessment and Financial Feasibility of the Production of Chemical Non-Timber Forest Products, or NTFPs, from which this paper was derived. On behalf of my team composed of Dr. Caning Predo, Dr. Guns Andrada, Dr. Ana Codilan, Assistant Professor Van Palma Torres, Assistant Professor Kimpi Evangelista, and Forester Renz Amada, I'm Marge Calderon, thanking the Forestry Development Center for organizing this webinar and all attendees for joining us this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doc Marge, for that comprehensive presentation of the market situation of Almaciga resin in the Philippines, and also providing us with a substantial context as to why the price is not right for Almaciga resin in the Philippines. So for our 382 participants, you may type in your questions in our Q&A box here in Zoom or in FB, and we will entertain them later in the open forum. So before we do that, we will be hearing the thoughts from our discussant. And I will be introducing her. So our discussant is Forester Luimyla Valente-Peña, or Lala to her family, friends, and acquaintances. She is a senior forest management specialist under the Forest Resource Use and Assessment Section, Forest Resources Management Division of the FMD DNR. She is also the Vice Chairman of the Bureau of Philippine Standards Technical Committee number 22 on lumber and timber products, which is tasked to develop the Philippine national standards for timber poles, timber structures, sawn timber, and wood as test samples, and also the BPS Technical Committee number 35 on wood-based panels. She authored several major policies in the DNR, and one of which is the Administrative Order on Gums, Resins, Foils, and Exudates, where Almaciga Resin is included. At present, she continuously represents the Bureau on TradeNet's National Single Window, assists in the preparation of notifications on import licensing procedure for the World Trade Organization and National Forest Resources Assessment. She is a proud graduate from the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, University of the Philippines, Los Baños, with a degree of Bachelor of Science in Forestry in 2010, and has successfully completed the UNFCCC Online 2006 IPCC Guidelines Training Program in April 2021 with a Certificate of Proficiency in Courses 501 and 541. So without much further ado, let us listen to the thoughts of our discussant, Forester Lala.
Good morning. Narinig po ako?
Yes, Lala.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Doc Anna. So a pleasant morning to all of us, especially to CFNR Dean, Dr. Marlo D. Mendoza, our dear speaker, Dr. Margaret M. Calderon, and her esteemed group in this study, and of course, Associate Dean, Dr. Analyn L. Codilan, and FDCOIC, Dr. Len Bugayong, Dr. Presidilong, and to all other 383 participants whom I can no longer mention. So actually, it's my great pride and honor to represent the government through the Forest Management Bureau to be the discussant for this Forest Policy ETalks and FPC organized webinar series. So actually, when I was listening to Ma'am Marge earlier, so I was really amazed by how much her group has dedicated their time and energy to capture the market needs for Manila Copal, as well as taking cognizance on the real situation of the tappers on the ground. So also, I would like to acknowledge Doc Marlo's appreciation to the DNR for the many policies that were approved recently and addressing some of the decade-old concerns in the forestry sectors. So actually, there is a semblance of truth to all the findings of Ma'am Marge group, such as there is indeed a difficulty in implementing resource inventory nationwide. Actually, this also applies to Rattan. And also the real situation in the export of Almaciga Resin have really dwindled over time, and that the resin quota was way bigger than the actual resin production. So we in the government continues to address these setbacks to provide equal access of natural resources to the people through the creation of enabling environment for them. So actually, in fact, this DAO 2021-33 is a brainchild of a research and development program that was led by the DOST Forest Products Research and Development Institute in 2018, because they introduced the commercial importance and wide range of potential uses of gums, resins, oils, and other exudates, which is GROE in different industries. So the objective of the program was to develop protocols and technologies for sustainable harvesting, extraction, processing, and utilization of GROE forest resources. And of course, one of the sub-programs for GROE tackled about the conservation and sustainable management of selected timber and non-timber sources of GROE, which is expected to produce a policy recommendation for the propagation and sustainable harvesting of GROE. So actually, aside from rebranding the ordinary minor forest products license that was mentioned in the presentation of Doc March earlier, we also improved some of the provisions of the existing policy for Almaciga Resin, and we strictly complied with RA 11032, or the Ease of Doing Business Act. So let me just give you a quick presentation of the 2021-33, although I realized that Doc March already gave a short overview of this one. Or if you want to repeat this all over again, my presentation in the comforts of your own home, you may check the official YouTube channel of the DNR-FMB and look for the 2021-13. You can play it all over again. So again, this is my presentation. So next slide, please. So what is the authority of the DNR to formulate such a policy? And what are some of the legal basis behind this DAO? So since we are talking about the use of selected timber and non-timber species as source for GROE, it is the Forest Management Bureau, being under the supervision and control of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, that is responsible for the protection, development, management, regeneration, and reforestation of forest lands, and the regulation and supervision of the operation of licenses, permits for the taking or use of forest products therefrom. So this is pursuant to PD number 705 as amended, or the Philippine Forestry Revised Code of the Philippines. So it is also worth mentioning that under Section 77 of the same law, any person who shall cut, gather, collect, remove timber or other forest products from any forest lands, or timber from A&D lands, public lands, or from private titled lands without any authority, or possess timber or other forest products without the legal documents as required under existing forest laws and regulations, shall be punished. So per EO number 318 series of 2004, promoting sustainable forest management in the Philippines, so the government shall provide a favorable and stable policy and investment environment that shall promote the development of efficient, globally competitive, and environment-friendly forest-based industries, and ensure that the raw material supplies are sustainable, and encourage value-adding processing in country to boost rural employment and the economy, which is basically the study of Dr. March Calderon has geared towards too. So of course, we have RA 371, series of 1997, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, because most of the areas, since the study areas presented by Doc March was in, I think that this is in Palawan, in Governor Generoso. And since most of the areas and raw materials for GROE come from ancestral land, so which was also one of the foundation of this order. And of course, we have EO 192, which mentions the mandate of the DNR. Next slide, please. So we also have EO 263, series of 1995, adopting community-based forest management as a national strategy, which recognizes the organized communities that were granted access to forest land resources under long-term funeral agreements, provided they employ environment-friendly, ecologically sustainable, and labor-intensive harvesting methods. And then finally, we have RA 7586 and RA 11038, because through this DAO, it considers the inclusion of protected areas for GROE resources extraction. So next slide, please. So what are the main objectives of this order? So of course, to enhance the existing guidelines, the tapping, extraction, collection, and transport of GROE, and then uplift the socioeconomic condition of upland communities, senior migrants, ICCs, GROE, plantation owners, and other stakeholders, which is why the market study that was presented earlier is very important as precedence to the drafting of a more holistic, sound, and responsive guidelines out of this policy. So next slide, please. Of course, we have strengthening the R&D programs on propagation, plantation development, resin tapping, sorting and grading system, extraction of oils, allowable volume, processing and use of GROE, and then the streamlining of the procedures. So since it was also mentioned in the presentation that the tappers are having a difficult time securing or renewing their OMFPL, or Ordinary Minor Forest Products license. This was the previous name actually of the permit that I will be introducing later on. So we hope that through this policy, we made the procedure easy. So next slide, please. So what is the scope and coverage of this order? So it applies to the tapping, extraction, collection, and transportation of GROE within forest lands, alienable and disposable lands, private titled lands, ancestral lands, national parks, and protected areas. So we intentionally included A and D lands and private lands to encourage landowners, not just those with tenure agreements, to establish Almaciga plantation within their properties to augment the natural sources of Almaciga and improve accessibility of Almaciga stands in the future, because this is also one of the recommendations in the study. So next slide, please. So what are the eligible areas for tapping, extraction, and collection? So we have forest lands. GROE may be tapped or extracted, collected within forest lands, provided it is covered by a valid tenure instrument issued by the DNR. So we have like CBFM. Also, they can do it within IFMA areas, SIGMA areas. So these activities shall only be allowed when it is programmed or incorporated in their respective or approved affirmed development management plans duly approved by the regional executive director concerned. So next area is, as I have mentioned earlier, the A and D lands and private titled lands. So the tapping, extraction, and collection of GROE shall be allowed in A and D lands and private titled lands in accordance with DNR approved GROE utilization plan. So we made sure that these landowners will prepare and submit a GROE utilization plan for the approval of the DNR red concern, which will indicate the series of sequential or simultaneous undertaking and schedules for our Almaciga extraction within their properties. Next area is, of course, ancestral land. So only CATI holders, or in the case of Palawan, the tribal ancestral land, shall be allowed to tap or extract resin from Almaciga. And also, finally, we have national parks and protected areas, but only within the multiple use zones and only by tenure migrants qualified for issuance of tenure. So for the tenure migrants and the IPs, they shall be required to update, of course, their respective plans should they consider venturing into GROE production. So next slide, please. So yes, since I have mentioned earlier, it was previously known as OMFPL. So, but in this policy, we renamed it to TECP, or the Tapping, Extraction, and Collection Permit. So there are eligible applicants qualified for TECP. So who are these applicants? So number one, we have Filipino citizen of legal age. Number two, we have an individual, sole proprietor, association, corporation, cooperation, partnership duly registered under the Philippine laws. Of course, we have holders of the valid government tenure, ancestral landowners, and PO whose members are all Filipinos. So how do you apply? So all applications for TECP shall be submitted at the senior implementing PENA concern. So there are some general requirements that are required to be submitted. So we have filled out application form. So the filled out application form is already in the order. So it is attached as annex. So it can be easily accessed by anyone. So proof of juridical personality. Of course, if you are a corporation or a partnership, you must be registered with the Securities Exchange Commission. You will have to provide the articles of incorporation or articles of partnership, and then endorsement from the LGO concern where the business will take place, or where the extraction will take place. Of course, we have geotag photo of plantation or stand where GROE will be tapped, and then location map, and payment, of course, of applicable fees. So the DNR Regional Executive Director concerned shall issue the TECP, and the applicable fees that I was mentioning is the payment of 3,000 for the TECP. Then again, we also extend the life of the permit from 1 year before. So now it has a duration of 5 years, renewable for the same period. So next slide, please. So inventory of GROE, so a 100% inventory of trees to be tapped shall be conducted by the center implementing PENA concern. So as recommended also in the study, the inventory of Almaciga resources will no longer be borne by the permit applicant or the permit holders, but it is the DNR's duty to conduct it if it for them should they apply for a TECP. So it was also mentioned that yes, the implementation of resource inventory is difficult. So nowadays, since there are advanced methods in resource assessment, inventory, and estimation, this can be employed by the DNR to ease in full resource inventory. So of course, it will still be subjected to groundwork for validation purposes. So, but the estimation of the extent of area and the cost of inventory will no longer be shouldered by the qualified tappers. So there will always be an option for the TECP applicant to hire private foresters to do the 100% inventory, but this should be with supervision of the center implementing PENRO concern. So it shall be the inventory, of course, and then the inventory report to be subscribed and sworn, supported with tally sheet, geotag photos, and other pertinent document shall be prepared by the center implementing PENRO concern. So during the inventory, only trees eligible for tapping, extraction, collection shall be inventoried so as not to impair the productivity of other trees. Yeah, kagaya po na nabanggit kanina, example is Almaciga that only about 40 cm in diameter shall be inventoried and be allowed for tapping. So next slide po. So we also had this provision in the order so that the tapping extraction shall be done with prescribed scientific method without the use of chemicals to ensure the health and survival of trees. So the scientific method part there is usually prescribed through the collaboration of the government and private sectors inputs through the extensive research studies such as the market analysis for Almaciga to ensure the sustainability of raw materials for GROE. So of course, when there is a movement of timber and other forest products, so the movement of GROE should be accompanied by a certificate of gums, resins, oils, and exudates or CO within and outside regions. So this transport document, the CO, shall be presented by the TECP holder. Shall be posted in the carrier at any checkpoints should there be an inspection or whenever requested. So the applicant need not to surrender it, and they do not need also to secure the CO every time they transport the GROE. So that is one of the best part of transporting GROE. So next slide, please. So of course, there should always be a monitoring and evaluation of tap or extracted trees. So a joint team composed of the DECP holder, the center implementing PENRO concern, and the LGO representative shall be formed and shall be tasked to conduct a survey of the health condition of the trees tap at least once a year or as deemed necessary by the DNR. So a production report reflecting the quantity of collected resin, including the number of seedlings planted for enhancement, shall be submitted annually by the TECP holder to the DNR. So also a database shall be maintained by the DNR through its respective regional offices and shall be linked to the Enhanced Forestry Information System. So on our part, the regions shall prepare a yearly report of GROE collection to be submitted preceding the end of each year. So shall be endorsed by the RED concern to the Undersecretary for Field Operations, copy furnished the FMB for monitoring purposes. So next slide po. Since this is also one of the objectives of this order, so the ERDB in coordination with the FMB and the IFPR, the IDOST, and other concerned government agencies and private sectors shall strengthen the R&D programs on the propagation, plantation development, resin tapping, sorting and grading system of GROE. So the FMB shall issue technical bulletins on the conduct of performance evaluation and proper extraction methods and procedure for GROE. Next slide po. So the DNR to the center implementing PENDO shall assist in the formation of GROE people's organization or cooperatives. And through this corridor, we shall develop capacity building programs for them. So again, since one of the recommendations of Dr. March groups is to strengthen the capacity of POs engaging in Almaciga Resin. So I think this can be addressed by the approval of this tab, by the implementation of this tab. And of course, the enhancement of GROE resources. So the DECP holder shall be required to conduct enhancement planting using the raised seedlings or wildlings within the permitted area. So actually, we deliberately inserted this activity to inculcate the holders a sense of ownership, so that they may develop a sense of responsibility for stewardship of natural resources. So next slide po. Ayan, and since we value the importance of GROE resources, so we also assign some bases where the DECP can be suspended or canceled, such as the later assignment of DECP. So it is prohibited. So the tapping extraction of trees that are not eligible for utilization. And then TECP po yan with expired permit. And then if mortality constitutes 10% or more, so ibig sabihin unsustainable ang kanilang harvesting methods. And then tapping extraction outside the permitted area, non-submission of report for 2 consecutive semesters, and then the violation of the terms and conditions of the issued DECP. So I think that is my last slide. Next slide po. Yan. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Lala, for sharing your thoughts and for sharing the content of the DAO on GROE. So actually, when we were doing our project, I think that was also the time that the DAO was being drafted. And we're happy that some of the findings also of the study were already addressed in that DAO. Thank you so much, Forrester Lala. So as of now, we have 395 attendees in Zoom and more than 70 plus attendees in FB Live. So for our participants, you can keep your questions coming. So we have received a lot of questions. That means a lot of interests in the Almaciga Resin industry. So if you still have questions, kindly type them in our Q&A box in Zoom or in our FB Live, and our tech team will be collating your questions to be entertained later. Okay, so I think we have a few minutes for an icebreaker before we move on to the open forum. Let me first give the virtual floor to Michiko. Mitch or Raymond?
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am Anna. So I invite our participants to please open a new tab or on your browser and go to menti.com. So we'll be having a very short icebreaker before we go to the very exciting part of the question and answer part of this webinar. Okay, so I'll just be asking 2 questions for this icebreaker. So madali lang po ito. Punta kayo sa menti.com and then type in yung code po natin na 1182-1553. And then, yan, sagutan nyo lang po. Okay, I'll be presenting. Okay. Nandiyan na po ba tayo? Hello, kindly stop sharing yan. Okay, so I can present. Okay, thank you. Sure. Okay. So, ayan. So, my first question is, which one is your favorite breakfast staple? Ayan. So, apat po yung ating pagpipilian. The first one is pandesal at kape. Second is yung iba-iba pong log or tosilog, long silog, tap silog. And then we have champurrado, other kakanin, saka tsokolate, and then lugaw. So far, ay neck to neck po ang laban ng pandesal at kape versus tosilogs and other logs. So, ayan, medyo lumamang na po ang mga logs natin, tosilog, long silog, tap silog. Ayan. So, ayan, mahabal po ang pandesal at kape. Ayan. Parang ito po ang paborito po yatang breakfast staple natin. Ayan, nagtabla na po sila. So, sino po kaya ang mananalo? So, keep on voting on which one is your favorite breakfast staple. Ayan, medyo marami po. 44% po ng sumasagot ay 45 na. Lumamang na po uli ang mga logs natin. Mukhang naiwan na po ang pandesal at kape na favorite. Kung ako po ang buboto, okay po ako sa pandesal at kape. Pero mukhang nananalo po ang mga tosilogs natin, long silog at top silog. Ayan, so I think meron na tayong winner. Although very close fight siya. So marami pa po yata ang bumoboto. Ayan, so 45% of our respondents, mga participants natin, mas type nila ang mga logs natin. Tosilog, long silog, top silog. Ayan. Tapos 41%, may nagbago po yata ng isip, lumipat. Nagpandesal at kape. Ayan, pinakasimple lang po. Pwedeng walang palaman. Pwedeng isawsaw nyo lang po sa kape. Ayan, lalakad na po ang inyong breakfast. Yung iba po, champurrado, 6%, lugaw, 8%. Ayan. Ay, nagtabla na po sila. So, I think ito po talaga yung favorite natin yung dalawa. Since nagtabla na sila, pwede na po tayo mag-move on sa second question or last question. Okay. Ayan. What are you most looking forward to after attending this webinar? Ayan, ang mga choices po natin is, ayan, una po, going back to work, eating lunch, internalize what you have learned, or get a quick energizing nap. Ayan, so marami po sumasagot. Yan, parang marami. Since nasimulan ko na po yung sa pagkain, mukhang marami po yung gusto lunch na agad. Pero nalamangan na po siya ng internalizing what I have learned for this webinar. So, neck to neck ang laban nila rin. So, ayan. Mukhang lamang po ang internalizing what I have learned. Ayan, marami pong gustong talagang i-internalize yung mga narinig nila ngayon. Or nag-internalize na sila ngayon para po sa susunod na part ng ating webinar, yung question and answer, mas magaganda po yung may tanong nila at masagot sana po ng ating mga resource speakers. So ayan, so mukhang mananalo po yung internalizing. So I think prepared na po yung mga resource speakers natin, si Ma'am Lala and si Ma'am Marge. Okay na po. So I'll turn it over now to our moderator, si Dr. Analyn po, para po simulan na natin yung question and answer. Thank you po for participating, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Raymond. Medyo nagutom tayo doon sa ating icebreaker na yon. Kala ko may pa-deliver ang FDC pero wala pala. Anyway, so for our participants, we will be starting our open forum, and kindly read po itong reminders natin for the open forum. So only click the raise hand button if you wish to speak during the open forum. So later on, if you want to ask your questions live, so you may raise your hand and wait for the host to recognize you. And questions may also be asked via the Q&A tab here in Zoom or via the comment section in FB Live. For our participants, don't forget to indicate your name and is it for Ma'am Marge or is it for Forrester Lala that you want to direct your question to, and the name of your organization before asking your question. Okay, so let us start the open forum. So our first question is from Forester Eric Buduan of the Forest Foundation Philippines. And the question is, there may also be a challenge on the accuracy of the AAC, or the annual allowable cut. Is the AAC based on actual inventories of healthy resin producing Almaciga and not just based on estimates? There is a tendency that AACs are overestimated for monetary reasons. So I believe this is for Marge.
Hello, Forester Eric. Good morning. Ewan ko lang kung merong kung merong nakasulat sa mga policy issuances ng FMB about how AAC is determined. Actually, kasama to sa hinanap namin, pero wala kaming makita. We only found records of how much AACs or resin quotas were issued to different permittees. Now, Ana, merong merong pang tatlong tanong ni Forester Eric, so siguro pwede think na rin yung iba para kasi parang very related sila. If yes, you may read.
So let me just go to the Q&A box. Yeah. Okay, so basahin ko na po lahat ng question ni Sir Eric. So very much engaged sa ating policy forum. Second question is, may I know if the stability of resin supply is considered in the study? There may also be a significant volume of resin production, but the periodic demand or requirements of the buyers are not met due to the seasonality of resin collections. Also, consider the need to plant Almaciga trees in tenured areas to address the declining natural stands and ever-increasing inaccessibility of natural stands. Yan po.
Kaya ni-request ko si Ana kasi itong mga ito ay nag-crop up din during the conduct of our study, no? Doon sa stability ng resin supply, ang nakikita talaga nating problema ay nahihirapan ang mga tappers na umakyat kasi ang lalayo na ng mga resin ng mga Almaciga stands, no? Nahirapan sila umakyat, nahirapan din sila magbaba. So kung titingnan natin, substantial pa naman yung ating mga Almaciga trees, but the problem is the accessibility. So yung nabanggit ko kaya doon sa presentation na project namin ngayon, we are trying to develop an inventory system that will make use of technology such as drone technology, remote sensing, and for that we have, I think he's present here, yung ating great scholar from NAMRIA, na kung saan gusto sana nating magamit yung mga technologies na ito para makapag-develop ng mas efficient na inventory system na hindi na kailangan na lahat halimbawa ng mga Almaciga stands natin ay aakyatin at bibilangin, no? Baka pwedeng magkaroon tayo ng ganitong sistema tapos magsasample tayo para sa ground validation. Kasi doon siguro sa atin na nakatry na ng umakyat, no, ng Almaciga stands natin ay alam nating napakahirap at napakalalayo talaga. In fact, pumunta ako doon sa Governor Generoso, may jeep pa nga kaming sinakyan, no, paakyat doon sa kanilang eco park. Nagtry pa lang ako na mag-descend doon sa kinalalagyan ng mga Almaciga, hindi ko na kinaya, no. So alam natin na yung pag-assess ng current supply ng Almaciga Resin ay nakadepende talaga sa maayos na pag-inventaryo ng ating Almaciga trees. Kasi saan ba natin kukunin yung mga resin kundi doon sa mga puno, ano? So doon sa GROE na policy na diniscuss ni Forester Lala kanina, ay di nakita nga natin na kailangan mag-conduct ng 100% inventory ng mga tappable trees na 40 cm above, which is very reasonable, no? Kasi at dapat din naman talaga na i-monitor kasi nga baka mamaya nag-overtap na sila. Kaya lang na-imagine lang ng team kung paano ito gagawin and at what cost. Kasi isa yun sa hinaing ng mga POs na napaka-expensive on their part, yung pag-conduct ng inventory. So it's good that the duration of the permit has been extended to 5 years from 1. Talagang napakalaking tulong yan sa mga POs. Pero hindi ko alam kung paano tawag dito, ma-implement ng maganda yung annual monitoring. No, yung annual monitoring, which I think ay magiging equally expensive as the annual inventory that was required in the previous policy, under the previous policy issuance. Ayon. Tapos yun namang sa pag-develop ng Almaciga plantations, isa din yan sa tiningnan ng project namin. Hindi nga lang namin na-present dito for kasi nag-focus lang tayo dito sa pricing. But what we did in the project that we had under the program of Dr. Razal was to use yung gumamit tayo ng mga GIS maps, tapos in-identify natin kung ano yung mga areas that are suitable, possibly suitable for the development of Almaciga plantations. Kinonsider natin yung topography, yung elevation, and siguro a few other variables na alam natin ay requirement ng Almaciga trees to grow. Pero syempre medyo limited din kami because we just made use of secondary data. Tapos in-identify ng team kung halimbawa sa Governor Generoso ano yung mga possible areas where plantations could be developed, and then we made projections about resin yields in the future and how much the NPV, for example, would be. Kaya lang alam din naman ni Forester Eric na slow growing species ang Almaciga, no? At ayon doon sa mga literature na nakita natin, parang ang growth rate, ang annual increment ng Almaciga ay 1 cm to 2 cm per year. No, so ibig sabihin natin na 1 centimeter per year ang kanyang growth rate. Para mag-reach niya yung 40 years, which is the minimum diameter para matap ang Almaciga, kailangan natin ng 40 years, di ba? Kaya nga doon sa parang last slide ko kanina, sinabi ko nga na when should we start planting? The best siguro the good time. It's a good time to start establishing Almaciga plantations now. Kasi ang haba, ang tagal ng kanyang ng kanyang rotation. So tama yung ang point ni Forester Eric na inaccessible na kasi. At di ba sa atin, halimbawa may sinasabi tayo na dapat ay kino-consider natin yung economic radius kung saan tayo magsusource ng ating resources. Baka base nga dito sa dito sa result na napakababa ng presyo kumpara sa actual cost of production, including opportunity cost of time. Ang implication ay tinatap na natin yung mga uneconomic areas, beyond na sila dapat doon sa economic radius. Kaya lang just the same, tinatap pa rin ang ating mga kapatid na katutubo kasi wala silang masyadong alternatives. So yun yung parang nagiging emotional kami when we saw how difficult it is really to access the remaining Almaciga stands. Talaga nakita natin kung gaano kahirap. Ayun, so sana isama din yun. Kahit kasi minsan sasabihin natin, ay napaka-slow growing yan, dapat mag-focus tayo sa fast growing. Kapag ganyan palagi yung attitude natin, ay di eventually we will have forests, we will have plantations na puro short rotation ang nakatanim dahil hindi tayo tumaya para magtanim ng mga long maturing species. Ayun. So I hope Forester Eric, meron pa pala akong sasabihin, Forester Eric, from the Forest Foundation of the Philippines. Kasi yung sa bagong study na nabanggit namin, nagkwento na doon sa bagong study na ginagawa namin ngayon ay minomonitor namin yung resin yield ng Almaciga trees, pero very limited kami kasi yung project namin is just for 2 years, and so we would doon sa project ay magko-conduct kami ng resin yield monitoring for 1 year, hopefully para makapture namin yung seasonal differences as well as other variables that could affect the yield of Almaciga. Kaya lang 1 year lang yon, I mean, posible na hindi namin makuha yung mas magandang yung mas magandang picture kung ano talaga ang nakakaapekto ng resin yield. Kasi ang gusto naming makita dito, we are also looking at the frequency of tapping, no? Kasi halimbawa may mga tappers na bumabalik every 2 months, every 4 months, every 6 months, or every year, depende. So gusto din namin mapag-aralan. Significantly different kaya ang yield kapag nag-tap sila every 2 months, halimbawa, kumpara sa every 5 months or every 6 months, kasi baka mamaya pareho lang naman pala yung yield. Minamayat-maya nila, ang laking hirap para sa kanila, then might as well, di ba? Might as well na baka ma-advise natin sila na pareho din lang ang yield na makukuha nyo kung babawasan ninyo yung frequency of tapping. Tapos magagamit ninyo yung oras ninyo for other things. Huwag na lang ito yung maging source of livelihood kasi sobrang hirap talaga. So ang hope ng aming project, no, ay sana ay merong tumulong sa amin para makapag-conduct ng longer duration study that would allow us to monitor the resin yield hindi lamang sa 1 taon kundi sa mas mahabang period, para kapag nag-recommend tayo halimbawa sa FMB na dapat yung resin quota, no, siguro wag na nating tawagin na AAC kasi timber yun eh. Pag nag-recommend tayo ng resin quota sa FMB ay merong basihan talaga na solid, no? We recognize na yung 1 year na data namin ay hindi yung talagang maging very solid basis, but at least I think it's a good start. Ayan, so sana dito sa mga present ngayon ay meron mag-pick up ng aming plea na baka pwedeng mag-conduct tayo ng mas mahabang resin yield monitoring. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am March, for that heartful response to the first 3 set of questions that we have in the Zoom. So ito po ang bagong advocacy ni Ma'am March, and we are welcome po for for other institutions to join us po in this advocacy. So sa mga questions po na nabanggit natin kanina, we have stressed the importance of the proper inventory of the Almaciga trees that produces in resin. At the same time, yung need din po natin na magkaroon ng inventory of the resin yield. So 2 things po. Actually, yung next question is actually related to that. Basahin ko na lang din po. Question niya, anonymous ito. Do we have a projected supply of Almaciga resin? How reliable is the database on resin resource of the Philippines? How long will it last at the current practice of tapping? And how do we ensure sustainability of Almaciga resin? So I think that was answered. And hopefully po, doon sa second phase ng project ay makapag-provide tayo ng baseline data and the beginnings of a database on the resin resource of the Philippines. Okay po. Next, okay. We have a question from Mr. Jordan Kit Olager Carillo. I think this is just a confirmation of the findings of the study. So he said that redundant requirements of resin production is one of the burdens of the POs and tappers in selling their products. So I think this is just a confirmation. And a question from Mr. Rogelio Hibe of FMB. In the current situation, both in Palawan and Governor Generoso, general kasi nakalagay dito, Governor Generoso, what can be recommended as standard price of Almaciga resin for the PO to maximize their income? Ma'am March?
Okay. Yun kasing ayon sa pag-aaral ni na Dr. Razal at ni na Dr. Lerma Maldian, napag-alaman na magkaiba ang quality ng resin na makukuha sa Palawan, sa Governor Generoso at saka sa Samar. Meron talagang differences, pero siguro sila ang mas angkop na magsabi kung ano yung mga differences na yan, at yung mga differences ay nagja-justify ng pagkakaiba din ng presyo. Kaya lang, siguro sabihin na natin na mas mataas ang presyo ng resin galing sa Palawan at mas mababa ang sa Samar at saka yung sa Governor Generoso. So siguro ang pinaka-point lang ng presentation, isa sa mga points ng presentation ay ma-incorporate lang sana yung opportunity, yung time, no, yung hirap at yung hirap ng pag-collect ng resin ng mga tappers, kasi parang minsan, no, kulang yung presyo na natatanggap nila. In fact, nung bumalik kami nitong 2 months ago yata or 3 months ago sa Governor Generoso, parang ramdam na talaga ng mga tappers na kulang na nga yung natatanggap nila. Although hindi din naman pwedeng i-equate dapat yung presyo ng resin sa Governor Generoso doon sa Palawan kasi magkaiba nga yung quality. So wala siguro kaming marirecommend na standard prices kung ano lang yung sana maipasok doon sa presyo. Yan.
All right. We have another question from Mr. Mario E. de la Peña of DOST Siquijor. The foot of Mount Talinis in Negros Oriental has Almaciga trees and is not mentioned in the presentation. In fact, FPRDI has trained POs in Valencia, Negros Oriental on how to properly tap the Almaciga trees, which happened in the late 80s. Do you know what is the status of that project?
Ako na rin, Ana, no? Yeah. So doon sa status ng if the project na binabanggit is the project with FPRDI, wala po akong alam sa status ng project na yan. Pero doon naman po sa presence ng Almaciga trees, yung data na present po namin ay kinuha namin sa Philippine Forestry Statistics. And during our meeting with FMB, I think na-present namin ito sa FMB, na point out po namin na may ilang mga producers ng Almaciga Resin ang hindi naka-reflect sa Philippine Forestry Statistics. So halimbawa, yung production ng Governor Generoso, tulad na nabanggit ko sa slide, which started in 2012 or 2013 yata, ay hindi siya nakalagay sa statistics. Tapos na-surprise din yung Samar, no, because we also presented a proposal to make the Samar Island Natural Park o National Park as one of the study sites for the project we're currently doing. So nung naipakita din namin na hindi reported yung production ng Samar, nagulat din sila, pero parang may reason yata yung sa Samar kung bakit hindi na naisama, no? So ang ibig lang sabihin na posible na may iba pang mga production sa ibang lugar na kung saan merong Almaciga trees na hindi nare-reflect sa Philippine Forestry Statistics, na siya naming naging main source ng tawag dito, siya naming naging main basis sa pag-select ng project sites. Nagkataon lang na napunta kami doon sa Governor Generoso dahil yung kasama namin si Dr. Guns Andrada ay nagkaroon ng field trip doon at nakita nga niya na very active, no, yung Almaciga Resin production doon sa lugar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Marge. Now, we also have a question for Forester Lala from Dr. Jem Castillo of RICS. Does the FMB have an estimate of the cost of inventory for Almaciga trees per hectare, considering that now the DAO requires a DNR to do the inventory? Ms. Lala?
Yes, good morning po. To the one who asked his question, so we actually have a DNR administrative order 2004-16. So the rate usually for 100% timber inventory, the intensity, the 100% intensity is usually 1,200 per hectare. So plus the actual cost of transportation by the field inventory team that will conduct the inventory. So yes, we have an existing policy for that, but that policy is currently being revised or amended, being reviewed by the DNR to correct it if it's being problematic in the field right now. So that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Lala. Next question is from Rob Roy Esmale. Based on the TV show KMJS, the cultivation and harvesting of Almaciga in the forest is illegal. What are your thoughts in this scenario? I think Ms. Lala, could you answer?
Yes po. Siguro po yung report kay Puso mo Jessica Soho, kaya siguro bawal. Baka po siguro walang permit baka po siguro walang license. So yun po yung isa lang po namin na nakikita kung bakit pinagbabawal. So since hindi naman po lahat din ng areas ay hindi po lahat ng areas na nabanggit ko kanina sa presentation ko ay eligible for tapping since ngayon lang din po natin na-introduce yung mga areas na yon. So baka lang din po dun sa mga areas and of course yung legality nila of conducting the activity. So yun lang po yung aking thoughts on this. Also, if I may add, Doc Anna and Marge and Doc Marge, gusto ko lang din pong sagutin yung about sa price or yung about sa quota, yung sa AAC kung bakit hindi po namin talaga siya isinama sa policy. So kasi it's usually difficult to set a specific figure po kasi or even a range in a national level policy since nabanggit nyo nga din po, the market is very fluid. So I'm not saying that it is not allowed, but it will be constrictive po in the future since if you already assign a floor price or a quota or AAC and the market trends and supply and demand changes, which it will for sure, we will have to go through a stringent process again to have this policy approved by the DNR Secretary, so to speak. But we can always prescribe, gaya po ng nabanggit ni Ma'am. Yes, narinig ko po Ma'am ang sentiments, yung recommendation po na yes, we can set a ceiling, we can prescribe the quota, the AAC, or the pwedeng allowable extraction volume na hindi pa rin po tayo, kumbaga, agreed kung talagang anong itatawag natin dun sa allowable volume ng for resin to the issuance of supporting documents like guidelines in the form of directives or pwedeng memorandum order which may either happen on a bureau level. So pwede pong sa amin lang yan sa FMB or USIC level na mas madali, mas kumbaga kaya din natin siyang i-revise time and again if need arises. So of course, yun din pong mga policy namin, we are always doing it through collaboration with other concerned government agencies. So since meron na pong kumbaga na-introduce na idea about the price, we can also include DTI for the environment concerns for Almaciga Resin and of course use of consultation din po with the concerned stakeholders. So yun ma'am, noted po ang ating dahil same lang din po ako na we share the same sentiments po din. I also want to help as many communities as possible, hindi lang po yung ating mga direct tappers. O yun ma'am. Thank you po.
Thank you so much for that, Forester Lala. Ano naman yung... yes ma'am, kayo po.
Ana, oo. Baka din part dun sa tanong ay ang bawal kasi talaga, di ba, Forester Lala, ay yung pagputol ng almasiga. Kailangan ng permit para sa tapping pero bawal talaga magputol. Walang ini-issue ang DNR na permit para sa pagputol since kailan pa yun?
1987 ma'am.
1987
pa po.
Opo.
Opo. Baka nga po ganun kasi harvesting po yung term baka bawal po talaga since nabanggit din po kasi ni Ma'am Marge na talagang slow growing po ang almasiga. So talagang sinesave po natin sila so as much as possible. So yun din po.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we have one participant in Zoom that wants to ask a live question. Tama po ba? Si Mr. Willan Franco Tayone. Can our team promote Mr. Tayone? Okay. Okay, Mr. Tayone, you're now permitted to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello po. Can you hear me?
Yes po, loud and clear.
Okay. As the only souk in the province of Davao Oriental, the Davao Oriental State University or DORSU would like to be the first. Would like to express our willingness to collaborate with you on Almaciga RDE-related activities. Now, as the Vice President of the Research, Development, and Extension of DORSU, we've been doing also research and extension activities for the Latag community. No? Latag is the Lumad Almaciga Tappers Association of GovGen. And also, though the type of research and extension activities that we did in the past are, shall we say, small scale, and this time would like to upgrade, and then we submitted a proposal to CHED that proposal titled Future Proofing the Sustainability of Almaciga Industry of GovGen Davao Oriental. And we really need your expertise on how we can partner with you And I don't know if how we can advance this engagement po. And on the part of Dorso, we really need help in any way we can, because number one, we don't have an expert of Almaciga, though we have foresters here, pero iba po yun ang kanyang line of expertise. So paano po kaya kami maka-reach po sa inyo? Paano po namin ito ma-advance po?
Ana, ikaw nang sumagot niyan.
Okay po. So, Mr. Tayone, thank you po for expressing your interest, and I think we can communicate na lang po after this webinar. Tama ba, Ma'am Marge?
Yeah, pwede din siguro nating mabanggit kay Vice President.
Iya po, opo.
Opo.
Ng latag.
Sa taga Davao Oriental, Davao Oriental State University, Dorso.
Dorso po, opo.
Yes. Okay, yes sir. Bali, sa totoo lang po ay nakikipag-usap nga kami doon sa Governor Generoso na sana magkaroon ng local academic institution na pwedeng kasi malayo po kami mas maganda sana kung tagaroon. So maganda po na nabanggit ninyo yan ngayon. And isa sa mga needs po doon sa latag na binanggit ninyo ay yung magkaroon sana ng melting machine sila. I don't know if that is part of the proposal that you submitted to CHED, yung i-explore yung pag-process ng resin. Pero sa totoo lang po, yung nabanggit ko na po itong possibility na ito doon sa ibang departments ng college namin, lalong-lalo na po sa Department of Forest Products and Paper Science, para po doon sa possible processing ng resin. Maraming salamat po. Tulad ng nabanggit ni Ana, ay kukontakin po namin kayo after. No? And I think the college will be, nandiyan pa ba si Dean? The college will be very willing to partner with your university. Thank you.
Thank you po, Ma'am Marge. Totoo po yun. Yung original proposal po namin submitted, included po doon yung melting machine, kasi ito po yung request talaga ng LGU nila Mr. Joey Gamaw. Kilala niyo po siguro si Joey. And then ang problema po yung nung nakipag-usap po kami sa forest products, at first okay po sila, kaso lang po nung tumama yung pandemic, medyo na-withdraw po yung support ng forest products. Kaya ang sabi po ng CHED, i-revise nyo na lang. So nawala na po yung melting machine na sana nandun po sa original proposal namin. So maybe sa susunod na proposal, if we can forge a proposal and connect with you, again, as I have said, we are very much willing to collaborate with you and help our tappers here in Davao Oriental.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Tayone. So we'll take note of that. Now, going back to the question in our Q&A box, do we have, from Sir Jam Castillo, do we have research on economic harvest from planted Almaciga in lower elevations, considering that the existing range of Almaciga habitat is 500 to 800 meters above sea level? Do we know this already? Okay. Ako na lang po, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Sir Jem. One component of the study is that we look into the feasibility of developing plantations, both in southern, northern Palawan and in Governor Generoso in Davao Oriental. And our estimate and the areas of suitable plantation for Almaciga can go as low as 200 meters above sea level. And tama ba, Ma'am Marge, we have narratives that before, yung pong mga Almaciga trees ay talagang pwede po silang makita sa lower elevation areas before the 1980s ban on cutting off Almaciga trees. Yeah. Okay. Okay, let me just check. Okay. Meron pa po tayong isang naka-raise hand and I should
yata.
kailangan ko pong i-recognize ito. This is the head of our program, Dr. Ramon E. Razal. Sir Razal, you are permitted po to unmute yourself.
Hello. Thank you, Doc. Okay lang bang oral na lang o direct na lang ang question ko? Kasi,
Yes, sir.
okay. Una, congratulations, Doc Marge, saka sa team. Napaka yaman ng iyong presentation. Kaya hindi ko maisulat sa chat box kasi meron akong mga katanungan. So, ano na lang, tatanong ko na lang directly. Pwede bang mag-request na balikan yung ilang slides? Okay lang ba? Doon sa microeconomic analysis sa Governor Generoso, yung unang-unang slide tong pinakita mo yung comparison between the supply and demand.
Okay. Can we
balikan yan?
Can you PowerPoint?
Check ko lang yung PowerPoint.
Yes po. Yes, Ma'am Marge.
Pasensya na kasi ang
Okay,
bilis eh. Mabagal na yung mga matatanda.
Ito po ba, sir?
Hindi. Yung meron na kayong pinakitang data na kino-compare na yung supply saka yung
Results yata.
Soviet.
Yes po.
Sa micron na siguro yun. Pasensya na sa mga audience ha.
Microenvironment.
Yan. Ito. Yeah, this table. Kasi dito na-confuse lang ako dito sa demand na current na 6,500 kilograms sold per month. Sold or bought by the company per month. Kasi kung ito ay sold, nag-guess niyo yung question. Kung ito kasi ay average volume na sold nila, then we have to know ano yung conversion rate from the resin that they acquire to the volume that they sell. Kung ito ay sold. Pero kung ito ay volume bought, no? So meron talagang mismatch between the current supply and the current demand. In fact, the current supply will exceed the demand. Kasi 6,500 kilograms lang. When they can demand 12,000, when they can supply 12,000 more kilograms per month. So medyo nako-confuse lang ako. Ano ba yon 6,500? Is that the volume sold or bought by the company? Yan lang, no? But gusto ko lang ma-clarify ito kasi medyo na ano lang ako. And then dito sa potential na meron kayong ginamit na statistics na 3.1 kilogram per tree per year as yield. Pero based on your presentation, ay hindi pa talaga alam how much is the yield per tree. And dun sa mga tanong kanina, actually meron na kaming study, preliminary findings na elevation affects yield. So hindi lang kung pwedeng patubuin yung almasiga doon, kung tutubo. Pero magpuproduce ba ng resin? No, yung nasa elevation na 200 lang. That is something that we have to establish. So siguro, medyo careful tayo sa pag-recommend na pwede nang magtanim at elevations of 200 kung hindi tayo sure na at that elevation ay meron nang mapuproduce na resin, yung almaciga trees na ipoproduce natin. Okay. And then, okay lang ba? Yung medyo natuwa ako dun sa sinabi ni Doc Marge na kailangan pag-aralan. Pwede bang pigilan ang resin, ang almasiga sa pag-use ng resin? Kasi for a long time, the studies have been undertaken to induce the tree to produce resin. Pero sa kanya, meron siyang ni-raise na question, pwede ba nating stop? Pero ang tanong kasi ay related doon sa question na limited kasi yung AAC na binigay sa isang pero sa akin napaka-artificial noon. Kasi ngayon address naman yan more or less with a down na hindi na sineset yung AAC. Di ba? So baka hindi na talaga importante na tanong yung can resin flow be stopped? Kasi for the most part, erratic talaga ang flow. And the more pressing question actually for the tappers is, can resin flow be induced? Actually, they do rechipping. Not necessarily retapping, but rechipping to ensure that the resin will flow. No? And then, buti nandiyan si Sir Eric kasi meron silang study before na nagpakita na yung mga non-IPs sa Palawan, no, ay also conducting or doing their own tapping, and these were unsustainable compared to the tapping being done by the indigenous peoples groups. Pero parang hindi natin na-capture in our report yung supply coming from the non-indigenous peoples groups o continuing pa ba yung ginagawang tapping ng mga non-indigenous peoples groups. Kasi isa rin ito sa mga complaint ng mga IPs na sila ang nabe-blame for the improper practices being done by the non-indigenous peoples who are not familiar with traditional and probably safer tapping practices. And lastly, kasi ang gusto ni Doc Marge ay ma-value din sa pricing yung travel time, yung opportunity cost. Ang iniisip ko lang, how about the value that the indigenous peoples contribute to protecting the forest, no, for keeping them intact, no, because they are able to generate income from the resin that they are able to collect. Parang hanggang dun lang tayo sa travel time nila, paano naman yung kanilang effort na protektahan yung forest? Paano natin mababali yun? From the point of view of the tapper lang siguro yung pricing will cover yung kanilang cost of opportunity cost of traveling. Pero what about yung the industry value? O kung wala kasi yung industry, baka wala na yung mga Almaciga trees na yan eh. Kasi walang pakinabang. But because there is value to the trees, no? Kaya napoprotect kasi may pakinabang yung mga indigenous peoples. So indirectly, nagko-contribute din yung mga buyers ng Almaciga Resin to protecting the forest. So hindi ko alam paano natin i-input sa pricing yung gano'n. So pasensya na, medyo pinag-isipan ko din kasi napakaganda ng report. So sana ma-take into account din yung ibang mga comments. Salamat po.
Thank you.
Sorry, naka-commit pala ako. Thank you po, Dr. Sal, for those questions. Marge, would you like to answer the questions?
Yeah, yung 6,500 kilograms is the average, no? The average. Yun naman pong 12,000 ay base doon sa interview natin sa resin tappers kung gaano sila kadalas at gaano karami ang nako-collect nila. So there's talagang posible po na may discrepancy kasi yung 6,500 ay nakabase sa 5,000 to 8,000 kilograms na siniship to the buyer in Cebu. So yun po yung sa una. Tapos doon po sa tanong na yung nabanggit ko na can the resin be tapped, no? Ang konteksto po no sinabi kong yun ay dahil yung halimbawa sa Brooks Point, yung mga tappers ay baba lang sila ng baba kasi yun nga siguro dahil nagre-rechip sila, ay di labas ng labas yung resin. Pero yung binababa nila, hindi naman nila minomonitor. Na-meet ko na ba yung quota ko? Kasi baka mamaya lumampas na. So basta merong lumalabas, merong na-produce na na resin, ibababa nila. Ang nangyayari nga lang ay nakatenga ba sa bodega? Kasi once na-meet na nila dati yung 30,000 na quota nila, kahit na nakapagbaba sila ng mas marami, hindi nila pwedeng i-transport yon kasi huhulihin na yon. Ano po? So yun yung konteksto ng yun yung konteksto nung tanong ko, kasi totoo din naman talaga yung sinabi ni Dean Rasal na the tappers undertake rechipping to stimulate the flow of resin. Ayun. Actually, Forester Lala, yung isang concern namin dahil nga hindi na binabanggit yung resin quota doon sa GROE na daw ay baka lang mamaya ay tawag dito, din to, no, how do you say, mag-encourage ng overtapping, kasi para bagang from a highly regulated regime na meron silang nakaset na resin quota to one that doesn't mention anything about the maximum volume that they can bring down and transport. Parang sobrang laki kaagad ng leeway. And baka kasi ito'y magresulta sa overtapping, over collection. Yun yung concern. Tapusin ko muna siguro yung din ni Dean Rasal kung in case lang na mayroong reaction si Forester Lala doon. Tapos doon din sa sa tanong kung hindi nahagip yung mga resin tappers who are non-IPs. Unfortunately po, the project sites doon sa program natin only involve indigenous peoples as resin tappers. So wala po tayong na-interview noon na hindi IP. Both po sa Palawan at saka sa Governor Generoso, puro po sila IPs. And then doon naman po sa pag-identify namin ng mga possible areas for the development of Almaciga plantations na related din yata kanina sa tanong ni Forester Eric na kung pwedeng mag-develop na nga sa mga ibang areas. Doon po sa study natin ay we consider the literature about the requirements, the site requirements, site characteristics, no, na kailangan ng Almaciga para mag-grow, at kasama po yun sa elevation. So kasama po yung elevation. So yung tawag dito, yung natin na minap out natin, yung in-identify natin sa mapa na potential areas for Almaciga plantation development. Oo, siguro si AD Ana mas better can describe what we did para doon sa plantation development.
Apo. Yes, ma'am. For the plantation development, ma'am, we use a GIS, and we did overlay analysis to see or to check, given yung pong growth requirements ng Almaciga, given the elevation, the slope, the soil. So we did overlay analysis to see saang areas pa po in Palawan and Governor Generoso na pwede po tayong mag-establish ng Almaciga plantations. And actually po, hindi naman po natin nire-recommend na magtayo ng plantations outside the growth requirements of Almaciga. So we are also careful on that kasi nga po, yung ginamit lang din po natin ay mga assumptions at wala rin po tayo kasing data talaga pa kung paano po yung actual growth ng planted Almaciga. So yun pa din po yung isang missing doon. But so far po yung sa results ng study, it's based on the overlay analysis that we did on the existing growth requirements of Almaciga trees.
AB, may isa pa palang tanong si Dean.
Yes po.
Regarding naman the values of the IP's efforts in protecting hindi lang siguro yung Almaciga stands kundi yung forests in general, kung bakit hindi po siya makakapture doon sa presyo ng Almaciga Resin. Siguro ang pananaw ko dyan ay dahil ang resin naman is a market good at meron siyang presyo. So, ibig sabihin kapag market good, ang papasok siguro na mga considerations dyan sa pagset ng price ay syempre kung ano yung cost of production, kung kasama nga yung sinasabi natin sana na opportunity cost of time, tapos kung may markup sila, no, tapos you have to consider also the competition kasi baka mamaya kung sobrang mataas naman yung presyo ng Almaciga Resin, hindi na lang bibili sa kanila, maghahanap na lang ng substitute yung mga manufacturers, at kasama nga dyan yung synthetic resin, or they can import kasi meron yata mga ibang manufacturers na nag-import nga ng Almaciga Resin from Indonesia. Pero sa tingin ko po, yung value ng efforts, no, ng contribution ng mga indigenous peoples para sa pag-protect ng ating mga forests ay pwedeng ma-capture sa ibang financing mechanisms, sa ibang conservation finance mechanisms. Not necessarily po i-capture natin dito sa presyo ng Almaciga. Ayan po. Thank you. Baka si Forester Lala merong...
Lala, do you have something to say also to the questions of Dr. Zal?
Actually po, dun po sa overtapping or setting the allowable volume for the policy. Yes, indeed, we have missed that part actually. So siguro nung time na yun, since na-mention din po ni Doc Ana na during the time na kinoconduct yung study, talagang dinadraft lang din yung policy. And originally, no, originally yung draft po talaga ng policy is intended for Almaciga Resin only. So ginawa lang pong standard ng department na sinama na rin po yung mga gums, oils, and saka ibang exudates. So noted po yung sa setting the allowable volume. Siguro ma'am, if I may suggest, kasi DMC po ang lalabas nito, kumbaga clarificatory sa isang provision na kumbaga setting para din po maiwasan yung overtapping. Siguro we will convene bago matapos po itong taon. So medyo kumbaga medyo supportive naman actually ang management sa mga reforms natin sa policy. So I think kaya naman po siyang gawin. So yun, thank you po.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Forester Lala, and I hope po nasagutin tanong ni Sir Mon. And grabe po ang daming katanungan. So maraming salamat po sa interest nyo. But we have limited time, so last 2 questions lang po yung ating i-entertain. Yung question po ni Dr. Hermie Francisco, actually I saw her raised her hand. But Ma'am Hermie, basahin ko na lang po ba yung question niyo? Okay po, so ito po, you did mention an opportunity cost of 24 pesos per kilogram. So clarify lang po Ma'am Marge, for which site is this? And you also talk about fair price that is determined based on opportunity cost plus 20% markup. The values were 32.45 for Governor Generoso and 26.66 to 38.66 for SPAB. But the difference here is only 8.66 per kilogram. Does this cover fairly the opportunity cost, material cost, and markup? And do you have a similar cost return table as you have for Governor Generoso for SPAB?
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you Doc Hermie para dun sa question. Yung estimated na 24 pesos per kilogram na opportunity cost was actually developed for Governor Generoso, and it's in the report, but I wasn't able to mention it during the presentation. So nagkataon po na meron kaming estudyante na nag-conduct ng study tungkol nga sa opportunity cost ng mga resin tappers, but it was just in the Governor Generoso site and we were not able to do it in Palawan. So ang nangyari po ay inadapt lang namin muna yung value that we derived for Governor Generoso, but there could be possible adjustments in terms of how much for example the minimum wage in Brooks Point and in Governor Generoso could be, kasi yun yung main basis. So we can do that po. Regarding doon sa cost return analysis table, dito si Kaning, no, we developed we also tried to develop one for Brooks Point, but kung tamang alala ko ay kaya hindi namin present kasi nag-negative siya doon sa scenario na merong value added processing dahil napakababa ng kanyang AAC. Kaya kung napansin nga ni Doc Hermie, iba yung table na present namin for Brooks Point compared to what we presented for Governor Generoso. But we can share we can share with you the tables that we have for both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc Marge. And for the last comment or question, this is from Ma'am Norly Colili of NTFPEP Palawan. So first, congratulations po sa project team niyo, Ma'am Marge. Our community here in Palawan is grateful for including the Palawan IP community as collaborators and as one of your study sites. And she has a question directed to Forester Lala. Ma'am, through your help, would you or DNR Penro Palawan clarify DAO number 2021-33 to our tapping communities applicants now? So apparently daw po, marami po ang nakasalang na renewal ng applications, dating yung ordinary minor forest products license, but the long delayed responses are somewhat inconsistent with what was presented earlier. Any thoughts po, Forester Lala?
Thank you for the question. So I think Ma'am from NTFPEP was referring to the previous license, the permit OMFPL. So actually, since this policy is kumbaga ngayon lang po siya na promulgate ngayong taon, so talaga may transition period po talaga from OMFPL to TECP. So we are conducting naman po regular information drive para din po sa policy, and also it's very clear naman din po sa policy and then also the procedure na present din po ni Ma'am Marge earlier kung ano po yung magiging process. So I think po madali na po siya ngayon, wala na pong ibang mga channels, and then of course the documentary requirements hindi na rin po siya ganun kahirap i-provide. So yun po, siguro she was referring po to the old policy or to the old license, pero yun nga po, na-address na po siya ng current na policy. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lala. So that's the last question, and apologies for our participants if hindi po natin na entertain yung inyong mga questions, but as related by Doc Marge, we are continuing project po ito as we are granted for another phase of this project by the West TP Card, and very welcome po sa amin yung inyong mga comments and suggestions to further enhance po yung aming second phase study. So if you can communicate po with FDC or directly to our team with regards to your questions na hindi po namin nasagot in this policy forum. And thank you so much po for the interest of everyone, of 85 participants here in Zoom, and about 100 participants in FB Live. So maraming salamat po. That's the end of our open forum. And I will now turn over the screen to our MC, Ms. Michiko Buat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ma'am Ana. Thank you so much for the productive discussion, especially, of course, to our speakers, Dr. Marge Calderon and Forester Lala Valente-Peña, who patiently answered all of our questions, and to Ma'am Ana for moderating the discussion, of course. So Forest Policy ETalks is designed really to create space for collaborations, make clarifications, and use the platform towards forestry development and essentially influence important policy decisions. I am sure that many will support the current efforts towards making the price right for the Almaciga resin industry through creating opportunities for research, collaboration, policy interventions, wherein our natural resources can be utilized for the benefit of the resin tappers and local communities. And with that, I would like to present the certificate of appreciation to these speakers. So let me read the citation first. The certificate of appreciation is awarded to Margaret M. Calderon and Luimyla A. Valente-Peña for serving as speakers during the Forest Policy ETalks 2022 FDC webinar series on The Price is Not Right, the case of Almaciga Resin in the Philippines, in partnership with the Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, with support from the Information Technology Center, UPLB, via Zoom webinar, given this 21st day of July 2022. Signed, Marlo D. Mendoza, Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, UPLB. So let's give them a round of applause. So may we have a photo with both the speakers, the project staff, Doc Len, Doc Pre, and Dean Marlo, of course. Speakers, kindly raise your certificates of appreciation if you have it with you. Ayan. So let me just add the people po in the technical committee team. Kindly help me in adding the spotlight, in spotlighting our project staff po, no? Ayan. Please turn on your videos for the group photo. Ayan, meron na si Ma'am Marge na certificate of appreciation agad. Okay. So let me take your picture first. Smile lang po tayo. 1, 2, 3, smile po. Okay, just wait a minute because ayusin lang po natin yung group picture again. Okay? For another take po. 1, 2, 3. Let's take a picture. Ayan. Thank you so much. Okay na po ang ating picture taking. Again, palakpakan lamang po natin ang nangyaring ang ating mga speakers and of course our moderator. Ayan. Also, before we proceed to the closing remarks, I noticed some frequently asked questions. Let me just address this. The e-certificate will be distributed once the post-evaluation form is accomplished by the participant. The presentations of the speakers may be requested by interested participants, given that the post-evaluation form is already accomplished. So maybe the docu team can already paste the link to the post-evaluation form now. Okay? Even sa FB Live po natin, lagay po natin yan sa comment section. And here then sa ating Zoom platform. Ayan, so we may now proceed to the closing remarks, and this will be delivered, of course, by the officer in charge of FBC, Dr. Leonida A. Bugayong.
Thank you, Mitch. Okay na ba yung sound?
Yes po.
Okay, thank you. Good day, everyone. It's already about lunchtime, and we would like to thank our College of Forestry and Natural Resources, Dean Marlo Mendoza, as well as Associate Dean Analyn Codilan, also for helping us in moderating the webinar, and then the rest of the executive committee of the college. And of course, our speaker, Dr. Marge Calderon. Salamat for partnering with us for this webinar. And also, Forester Lala Valente-Peña, sorry Lala. Thank you for agreeing to be the discussant. Alam namin nasa ibang event ka ngayon and you've joined us just for this. Salamat marami. And then we also would like to thank yung ating almost over 400 participants sa Zoom and Facebook na kanina ko pang monitor. I'd also like to thank everyone who has given time and effort para pag-isipan ko ano talaga yung mga tanong na hindi sila makatulog pag hindi sinagot or tinanong sa mga speakers natin. We've seen Dr. Marge Calderon and her team presenting to us the results of their analysis, the macro and micro environmental analysis of the Almaciga Resin industry, focusing on the IP and PO resin tappers in the sites that they've mentioned. And they also forwarded recommendations on how to address the issues that were raised during their survey and interviews. And we have seen that some of the issues they raised are already addressed according to Forester Lala in her presentation of DAO 2021-33. But there are also, since this recent policy, we're looking at the transition. So again, what Dr. March mentioned about the delays in the permitting process, whether applying for and renewing the permits, there's a transition from yung dating permit na OMPFL to the TECP na binabanggit. I'm also concerned there with the provision that the 100% inventory of Almaciga stands will be done by DNR. So I think this will also take time for them to do this, and that will also contribute to the longer period for the processing of the new permits. So yun lang yung isang consideration then, that maybe Lala and your team can consider providing the cost for doing the inventory of this. Kasi nakikita, we've been to Palawan, Bukidnon, Quirino. Years ago, we did a study with NTFP and FMB, and we did 3 methods. We tested 3 methods of inventory, and talagang magastos. NTFP can attest to that kasi sila yung gumastos doon sa study na yon. And eventually, hindi naman nag-push through kasi may problems doon sa acceptance ng mga results ng aming ginawang testing of the inventories methods. But probably now that we are more into technology-driven mga methods, baka pwedeng makatulong, ma-lessen yung time and the cost of doing the inventory. Talagang mahal yan kasi it's really in the higher elevations and malayo and inaccessible. And then for those who do not know, meron tayong Almaciga tree sa tabi ng office ni AD Ana. AD Ana, hindi ko lang alam kung pwede natin i-test yung yield nun kasi medyo lower elevation yun. Katabi ng kwarto mo yan. And we're also, we welcome yung webinar topic on Almaciga Resin kasi for those who remember, FDC has been giving Almaciga Awards to prominent policymakers in forestry, environment, and natural resources. Although, dahil bawal nga yung pagputol, yung mga binibigay namin noon na plaque, are donated by our partners in the field na galing daw sa nabagyo. So may permit naman yon, and they even transported and sent this to us. Pero naubos na, kaya tumigil na rin kami sa pagbigay. Maybe the future directors of FDC can revive that kasi maganda. We have that award for policymakers and those who have contributed a lot to addressing yung mga policy issues through revisions or innovations in policy and governance ng mga resources natin. So we saw a lot of interest through the open forum. Hindi ko nababasahin, ang dami. Thank you, Dean Rasal, Dr. Hermie, Dr. Jem Castillo, si Vice President Tayone, sino po ba yung mga and also from other sectors na nagtanong. We will take note of the questions and help the team also identify kung ano yung mga pwede pa nating sagutin. So yun lang, maraming salamat sa ating lahat for the attention and really great interest that we've received in this webinar. Sana magpatuloy. We're calling on Dr. Razal, kayo daw yung project leader na nito. Meron pang mga pwedeng i-present daw on technology aspect naman in the processing and utilization ng mga na results ng inyong mga studies dito sa program. So that's all. Thank you and have a good lunch. Let's take care of ourselves and see you again in the next webinars. We have 2 upcoming webinars in August. the third webinar series on mangroves. There will be speakers sharing their experiences on how to manage the mangroves in I think Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao maybe. And then the fourth one will be about technologies and the roadmap to mangrove conservation and management. So that's all. Have a good lunch and good day. Maraming salamat.
Ayan,
Mitch?
thank you. Thank you for your closing remarks, Doc Len. And now for the announcements. Kindly follow the FDC's social media pages. We usually post webinar updates and highlights on our Facebook page at UPLB Forestry Development Center. We upload full webinar recordings on YouTube page as well as webinar summary. So yung YouTube page po namin is UPLB Forestry Development Center then. Ayan. Also, in the coming months, in August and September, we will continue the series on Turning the Tide, Why Mangroves Matter. So ito po yung binanggit na rin po ni Doc Len kanina. We will post updates soon about who will be the speakers, the discussants, ayan, and of course the title and the date as well. So lastly, here is the link and QR code for the post-evaluation form. Your feedback is most appreciated. Kindly accomplish on or before July 28th at 12 noon. Reminder, the e-certificates will be distributed once the post-evaluation form is accomplished by the participant. The presentations of the speakers may be requested by interested participants given that the post-evaluation form is already accomplished. So, important po talaga na ma-accomplish po muna natin itong post-evaluation form. So, please kindly scan the QR code. And of course, meron din po tayong ipoprovide na link. Ayan. But before we go po, the team requested for another group photo. So, I am going to invite the project team to open their videos, as well as, of course, the speakers, Doc Marge and Forester Lala, Doc Len, and Doc Pre, to join the photo opportunity. Ayan. I will be the one to take the photo na lang po. Okay. Let me know if everyone is present na po dito sa ating Zoom space. Naka-open na po ba ang videos po ng project staff?
Kaning Predo, hindi pa naka.
Apo, Sir Kaning po.
Sige po, pakitawag lamang po sila.
Nasa iba pa si
Ayun,
Sir.
ayun, wait lang.
Andiyan na siya. Hindi lang siya kasama dito sa gitna.
Ayan.
Ay, okay po.
Ayun,
Ayan,
napin ko pala,
I can
sorry.
see. I can see, sir. Ayan na po. I will add him. Ay,
Doc Kaning, you on your camera.
on lang po ng ating videos or cameras po para ma-add natin. Ayan. Add spotlight. Okay.
Uy, andito pala si Doc Guns. Thank you, Doc Guns. Si Van. Si Van.
Lala, thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Wait lang po i-add lang po natin. Ayan.
Ay, Doc Kaning. Nagtatago.
Ayan, kompleto na po ba?
Yes.
Okay, so I will just take a picture po. So, please ready. Best smiles. 1, 2, 3, smile. Ayan. Ayan, okay na po.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you din kay Ching. Maraming salamat, Ching.
Oo nga pala, si Ching.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you very much talaga.
Dapat may terminal report. Ano daw terminal report?
Okay na tayo, team.
Thank you, Marge.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Marge,
Yes.
mamaya meron pa tayong meeting.
Ako na-move yung meeting ko kaya makaka-attend na.
Ay, salamat.
Sige, thank you.
Mamaya.
Bye-bye.
Sige. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
team.
all.
Thank you all. With that, I close this webinar. Thank you again to our Zoom participants and our FB Live participants who joined us today. Again, this is Michiko Buot. A pleasant day to all.